Hello, Internet, and welcome back to Topical, your favorite podcast for, well, getting a little personal this time with Aradh and me. This is going to be a bit different than what we usually do. I believe we've done 12 NBA podcasts at this point, almost doing it week by week through the All-Star break to the end of the season. And, I've been not begging, but petitioning to do a personal one so I can get to know Aradh a little better. He can get to know me a little better. And you know what? It seems like we finally did it after 4 months, barring some unforeseen earthquake or technical collapse or World War III starting. So I guess you all can be happy for once. Unless, I don't know, particularly good at raising your moods. So, Aradh, you excited?
I am indeed. We do a lot of talking about basketball, but obviously there's more to life for both me and Ryan than just talking about the NBA. So it'll be cool for you guys to get some insight about the friendship that him and I had throughout high school and just the two of us in general.
And how? All right, well, I guess we can get started with something a little more interesting. So, you guys have probably seen that I've been shaking it up a little bit in the past couple episodes. In a way, it's kind of to keep you guys on your toes, not just have it go straight into a normal discussion. So, this time, instead of talking about my dinner, seeing how well that went with Rod last time, I decided I would have him come up with a couple questions that he's always wanted to ask me or that he thinks it would be interesting to have me talk on. And we'll just start with those. So, Arad, are you ready?
Yes, I am. So one of the things that I've been wanting to ask Ryan. So I know that you're extremely driven and like you dabble in a lot of different things. Like you're interested in sports and school, obviously, and you have I have your passion for math. Obviously, we took Spanish together. You're really good at Spanish. You referee. You're well rounded in general. So I guess the one question that I wanted to really ask you is, what do you do in just when you're completely free and you're just completely free time and you don't have any obligation, you're just relaxing. So I guess really what I'm asking is just what you do for fun, what you do to relax, what you do to unwind when you're not, working. Because you seem in one way or another, you always seem to be working on something. So that was just something that I was wondering.
Oh, yeah, no, it's a fantastic question. And for anyone that isn't already aware of the answer, they should check out Topical 15, the Andrew Winter recap, and you'll get a pretty good idea of this. But so I'm interesting in that when I'm not working on like an outside project, I just create other projects for me to do. So just to give you an example, I have a giant project spreadsheet that I can pull up right now. So even if it's something simple like playing a video game or something, I always have a goal with it. If I'm, let's say, trying to think of another example, if I'm watching something for entertainment, it's always like I'm trying to finish it because not because I'm enjoying it, in a way, like I'll even be more likely to finish something that I'm not enjoying as much because, well, I'll get into that later why that's the case. But it's always I'm incredibly goal oriented, and like this isn't to be all high and mighty or anything. It's more so my OCD than anything. But just I'm always trying to find something to strive for because if I don't, I really don't have anything that I know what to do, and if not get incredibly bored, just get incredibly discouraged. And just a couple of projects that I have ongoing right now that I can pull up. And when I say projects, it sounds all well high and mighty again, but also just super important. But it's anything from let's see. Okay, so this is one of my most unsuccessful projects ever. I got 1.16% of the way through this, and it's a project that I believe you actually completed 100%. Was watching every Timberwolves game this year. So that went horribly for me. I watched 2 games. So that was one thing. Then there was watching every game of the MLB playoffs in 2017. I got about 36% of the way on that. Watching every NFL game in the entire season in 2015. I'm talking every single game for every team. Believe it or not, I actually got 36.5% of the way on that, 123 hours in, so that's pretty impressive. There was watching every single Orioles game in 2016. Got 29% of the way on that. That doesn't look correct. I'm not really sure why it has that. Oh, that's 2017. That's right. I got more like 70% of the way in 2015. No, yeah, 2016. Yeah. And then there's one project that I have with UFC. I've talked about with you how big of a fan I am of MMA, and if I haven't, I'm a big fan of MMA. And it was basically a project to from the point that I watched my first fight, or like first found it on TV or online or whatever, just to watch every single UFC event from there on, and like every other affiliated UFC event. And believe it or not, I'm actually 87% of the way on that, and I'm like 3 months behind the current schedule on that, so that's fairly impressive. And then just to round out the sports things, there was watching every single baseball game this season that I wanted to. I'm about 56% of the way on that, but I have to update that spreadsheet. And then to give you a couple other ideas of some of the ones I have a whole tab for video games here. There was one that I did a couple years ago where I wanted to beat this Wii game that was Hot Wheels, and this one actually is a bit of a sore spot for me because it turned out that the game was buggy, and I found that out way too far into the project to abandon it. And when I was only 7 trophies away from beating the game, I had 771. I just needed 7 more trophies. I couldn't get them because whenever I would try to, the game would glitch out and crash. So I got all the way up to 98.85% of the way there, and I'm never going to make it 100% of the way, so it's a big disappointment for me. But one that I actually do have a chance of getting is NBA Jam. I know you know about the achievements on that if you've ever played the game, and I have 41 of the 45, so I'm actually pretty close there. And yeah, that should give you a pretty good idea. Oh, here's one more that's interesting. I actually had a whole goal to review every single Star Wars The Clone Wars episode, like, you know, the TV series that they had from like, I don't know, 2007 to 2012, 13. And I got 13% of the way there, and that actually comes up a lot in some of the other podcasts I've done where I was actually in the middle of that project and I was lamenting how I'm already at 40, 50 pages on the review, and I didn't know how much more I could do. Well, it turned out I couldn't do anymore, so I abandoned that about 16 hours or 16 episodes in, I guess. But yeah, that's one of the other interesting ones. But yeah, it's always just working on projects. And just today, for example, I was playing MLB The Show, the baseball video game that I've mentioned a couple times, and my big goal in that is to actually make it to free agency as a Road to the Show player, or just essentially the same thing as like 2K My Career, and just to make it to free agency, because like the big thing in baseball is it has some horrible rules on like when players can reach free agency. And basically how it works is if you're a minor league player, you can be stuck in the team system, or basically stuck in the minor leagues with that team for up to 7 years. And even if you reach the major leagues, you can get stuck on the major league team for 7 more years. So you can play a 14-year career and never make it to the free agency, which is absurd. And yeah, one of my goals was just, hey, let's get a player to free agency on the highest difficulties I can set. And by highest difficulties, I don't mean changing the sliders, because for some reason I always have a big problem with changing sliders in games. That feels, not, if not like cheating, that like I'm just changing the game. But yeah, on the highest difficulty, I've actually gotten, so here's another baseball term. So when you reach over 6 years of major league service time, which is just like the days you spend on a major league roster, you get to reach free agency. So I'm actually at like 4.1 years. So I'm actually like 2/3 of the way there and to free agency. So almost have that goal completed, and that'll be awesome when I do that. But literally, I spent how many hours today? Let's see. I spent 7 2/3 hours today, essentially from 9:20 to 5:30, getting one, not even one, yeah, half a year of service time on that game. And the big thing with me is, yes, all these goals were fun, but if I didn't have a goal there, I wouldn't be doing it because I would just get bored of it eventually. And it has to be a really fun goal to actually get me there, because I work in a weird equilibrium where if the goal is too big, or like the goal, yeah, basically, if the goal is too big, then it's too enticing, and I'm going to pursue it way too hard and burn myself out, usually after about 2.5 weeks from what I've found. But if the goal is, if not manageable, it's like reasonable, like not watching every single NFL game in a season, something like, well, the baseball one that I just mentioned, that while yes, it does take a while, but it can be reached in, well, let's see how many hours I put in. So it can be reached in like 50, 100 hours of playtime. So like that's manageable, but it also is fun. So like it has to be an equilibrium where it's fun enough that I want to keep doing it, but it's also manageable enough where like I'm not going to burn myself out and put in like not 24 hours a day, but like in some cases like 20 hours a day, just trying to get it over a 2 week period and then just saying, I don't really care anymore. So that's a long way to say really what I do in free time is projects, but I very much so tailor my day and my schedule around spending as much time as I can away from doing free time. So when people ask, "What do you do in your free time?" I can say whatever I want really, because I can point to all the other things I do and say, "Well, I also did these things." So yeah, was that
Gosh.
was that really what you were looking for?
No, I think it makes sense. That's actually cool, pretty cool way of looking at things. Because usually, like when you ask someone what they prefer to do when they're relaxing, it's just a lot of people will say they like to sleep or play video games or casual hang out with friends or spend time with their family or just So it's a unique answer. I like that.
Yeah, and honestly, I wouldn't be able to give that answer if I hadn't started doing time tracking massively in the past. Well, since when did I start exactly? Probably like the end of now. I started food tracking at the end of November last year, but I really started time tracking at the beginning of this year and just registering and logging like a giant spreadsheet how I'm spending all the hours in my day, so I can make those cool judgments like, oh, after about 2.5 weeks, I'll get sick of doing something, or oh, I got about this much sleep on average during this week, or I have like this awesome graph of just rolling average for my sleep time. Here, I'll actually send you a picture of it. It's a really cool graph, and I'll put this in the description for all the listeners. But yeah, like the biggest thing that's changed for me this past year has been, even though I've always loved data and loved collecting it, I've really gotten into just actually putting in the time to collect the data and making conclusions based on it. And even if I'm not making conclusions, knowing that in the future, if I want to, I actually can. So yeah, that's been huge for me.
Gotcha. So I have another question as well.
Yeah, sure.
So I mentioned this just a second ago, and I asked you the first question that I know you're into math, and I think you've mentioned in the past that in the future you wanted to do something related to being a mathematician. But I was wondering like what it because a lot of people, and obviously if you don't know that's also an acceptable answer because a lot of people don't know at our age. But do you have any sort of specific plan for how you want to get into work? Like after college, do you want to do a master's degree? You plan on going to graduate school of some kind, or what exactly is just your long-term plan for where you want to be, I guess, in let's say 15 to 20 years?
Oh, you were setting me up perfectly on these questions. So I've actually had to answer that question a couple of times recently since I started that past internship I mentioned a couple of times to you. But really, my plan for if not getting a job, then like the work track that I want to get on is, well, this really brings up the past internship I did at, well, not internship, I guess research opportunity I did at Dairy that I talked to you about Dairy?
I don't think so.
Okay, so I actually did a research opportunity at for the Dean's Early Research Initiative at VCU this previous school year and previous summer, and that was humongous for me because I got to assist university professors, well, really one assistant professor and a PhD student on doing the research, and they helped me on doing my own research, and I got to put out a whole research paper on like essentially doing data scraping and how to optimize algorithms to scrape data and, if not steal customer information from LinkedIn, then help companies to get it faster, which is far more humane or moral, I suppose. So that's humongous for me because I can say to a college or a company later on, hey, look, I have research experience at a university level. And then this summer, currently, I'm doing an internship at a EAB, what is it, Enrollment Advisory Board, which is just a consulting company for colleges so that they can, well, assist them on getting their enrollment numbers up, and they can point to it and say, oh, we increased our class size for our incoming freshman class by 6% or whatever, and they can say that they have more college kids, and obviously you make more money the more people that put deposits down in your freshman class. So I've been helping them out, and that's been amazing as well because now I can say, okay, I have this research internship, and at a university, and then I have a research internship in R&D at a company. So those are the real two big tracks for a math major, or really anyone who's into the statistical fields, the computer science fields, is just saying I have this experience on like really the two outcomes that you can have from getting those two degrees. And then in college, my big plan is just keep doing the research because that's what you do if you get like a degree like mine, or really most STEM degrees, unless you're getting like a full blown engineering degree, is just you can expect to go into research, and if not that, then software development or research and development. So in college, my plan right now is major in pure mathematics, and the biggest thing is if I change my mind and I don't want to do pure mathematics or even math anymore, I'm going to stick with my two minors of programming and statistics because I feel like that gives me a fantastic base and foundation where like no matter what major I'm getting, if I have programming and statistics in my bag, any company's gonna be like, "Ooh, look at that! That could really help us out." Especially if I got like a master's in one of those two, and yeah, I feel like that sets me up really well. And I mean, obviously, I could be wrong and come back on and be like, "So this is day 340 of the consecutive days where I've put out my resume and nobody's hired me," because I don't know if I've mentioned this to you, but I strongly expect a recession in the country about when I'm getting out of college, so that'll really suck. But yeah, I feel like that sets me up pretty well. So really, where I want to be in a company is just doing research and development, which means I'm investigating a problem or writing some code to give an answer to a company or designing a product that will help them. Like, what's a good example I can give? Hmm, so at the company I'm working for right now, one of the products that I'm partnering on is called Advancement, and the big idea is to get more recently graduated alumni from colleges to give back money to their schools, because that's another way colleges can make money, and the biggest thing is just make money because colleges are such a business. So the project is the product, sorry, not the project, is designed around just increasing that number. And the biggest way that the company does that is sending emails to those alumni and getting the click-through rates to go up for them. So the big thing that we've been working on there is increasing our SEO ratio, which is just, oh, that's not the right term at all. That's search engine optimization, which goes in hand with click-through rate. But I guess, yeah, we're just trying to optimize the click-through rate and get more alumni to open the email and then actually read the email, like stay on it for longer, because we can track that through cookies and crawlers and spiders and creepy stuff like that. And if we can get them to actually click the link, do they end up donating money? And we're also trying to analyze trends and say, okay, is it the younger alumni that aren't dating money? Is it not dating money? Yeah, that would they're not dating money. That's only what rich people do. Yeah, donating money to colleges, or is it the really old geezers that are donating the money? And like, where do we have to target it? So really, it's just collecting as much information as we can on a problem and just answering it through that. And that's something that I absolutely love to do. I haven't made that clear by just stuff like, oh, who's the current best 15 players in the NBA right now? Well, let me make a giant all NBA table, and let me make a humongous spreadsheet on like the 500 players in the NBA and their different box score and advanced metrics, and design a whole formula around answering that question. And really, it's not even having the answer that's the fun part. If you're only looking to get answers, you're not gonna have the motivation to go through the process. And like the process of finding answers is something I greatly enjoy. I love doing Excel tables. I love just collecting data from websites and writing a little code to go into a database. And yeah, that's stuff that I really enjoy. And right now I'm just trying to figure out what avenue do I want to go down for that. Do I want to be the programmer that scrapes the data, not scrapes, just queries the database to give the information to someone else? Do I want to be the systems analyst that designs the system to answer the problem? Do I want to be the person on the front lines of marketing and looking at the information that's given by the analyst and designing that into a product, or giving it or presenting it to a business member to actually get that product off the ground? Or just where in the process do I want to be, and in what avenue do I want to be doing that? So that's something I've really been trying to figure out right now, is just how am I going to leverage having a math major if I want to stick with that, or more so, how am I going to leverage having a minor in statistics and programming and that base into getting a research position or an R&D position later on in my career or life. So I suppose that's about my plan right now in 10 minutes or less.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I always like hearing about what people want to do in the future because I feel like, especially having been in high school the past 4 years, I feel like everybody's sort of been talking about goals more short term, like just in terms of either where they wanted to get into school or what they wanted to major in, or for the most part for us, I guess for the past 2 years, it's just been really centered around college and who's going where and SATs and ACTs. So for me, it's just refreshing to hear people talk about what they want in the bigger picture, like further down the line, because you always usually just hear like you always just hear like, what do you want to do when you're older, and then they tell you one thing and it's like, oh, okay. Then you just kind of think about your own road for it. But obviously there are different paths to getting to every different profession, which I think is one of the coolest things about after your post high school, post college life is just the different avenues you can take to get to different places. I just think they're always pretty interesting.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess I'll turn that question on you then. So what exactly is, if not your plan, then what would you want to see yourself doing in the next 5, 10 years?
Well, so my goal has ever since I was younger, I always wanted to be a doctor. Simply because my family's full of doctors. So my father is a cardiologist, and my mother is an optometrist. My uncle he's an interventional pain specialist. His wife, my aunt, is an OBGYN. We've got a lot of pulmonologists, endocrinologists. You know, we've got all sorts of doctors in my family. So it's just sort of something that I've been exposed to a lot. Um, and it's just I had like a little I had like a 2 to 3 year stretch where I was like, maybe that's not what I want to do. And this was when I was probably like a 9, 10, 11, and I was kind of like, maybe medicine is just kind of, maybe I shouldn't do what everybody just kind of not do the most, I guess, generic choice for, because obviously there's a little bit of a stereotype for like Indian Pakistani people wanting to
Yeah.
become doctors and stuff. So I thought that maybe for a little while I could try and do something, maybe think about doing something else. So I actually thought about investment banking, because one of my dad's sister's husband, so my dad's brother-in-law, one of my uncles, he is an investment banker in the UAE, the United Arab Emirates. He lives in Dubai, and he's got a pretty good life cut out for himself. So
Yeah, if he's living in the UAE, no kidding. The rent is not cheap there.
yeah. And so I thought about that for a little while, but then over time, as I was in middle school and stuff, I kind of realized that economics and finance kind of that would be the avenue that you kind of have to go down if you want to get to where he is. And I just decided that that's just not really where my interests lie. I'm really more into what goes into medicine and becoming a doctor, that sort of thing. So I like my goal basically right now is, so I'm going to VCU. My track is pre-medicine, and hopefully I can get through these 4 years with a nice enough GPA and a good enough MCAT score to get into a nice medical school. Then after medical, I would like to go to VCU just so I can stay in the same location for the next 8 years. I think it would just be convenient not having to move in between. So hopefully I can stay here for the next 8 years, finish up medical school. After that, I want to do a PM&R residency, which is pain medication and rehabilitation. So, because that is what my uncle does, my mom's brother. And after doing a residency in that, I'd like to do a fellowship so I can become an interventional pain specialist, just like what my uncle does. And then after residency and fellowship, my uncle has made it clear to me that if I can get through all those hurdles, then he'll open up a position for me to join his practice in Chicago, and that's ultimately my goal, to just end up as an interventional pain specialist, so I can head up to Chicago, work there, have a nice position secured, because it would be a family practice, and it would be something that was sort of already set for me, because my uncle's sort of been establishing it and working with it for the past 5, 6, 7 years now. So yeah, that's just something that that's kind of been my plan for the past, I guess we're seniors now, so been on my plan probably since about the eighth grade, seventh or eighth grade, and that's still what I'm sticking with. Obviously, it's a long road to get there because medical school is not going to be easy. Getting into medical school is not going to be easy. College probably isn't going to be that easy, and obviously residency and fellowship will be a challenge themselves. But it's a long road. But I think ultimately the reward is worth the difficult path to getting there. My uncle lives a pretty good life, so hopefully I can get to that position as well.
Yeah, no, certainly. What exactly does your uncle do as a practice? I might have missed that.
He's an interventional pain specialist, so he does like injections for joint pain, neck pain, back pain, and he basically what he does is he helps. Like if you're coming off of back surgery, then he takes you go see him. He can give you some injections to loosen up the muscle tension in your back. He can recommend physical therapies for you to go to, give you whatever medication you need. Basically, just or if need be to write a prescription, because I think one of his main things is that he doesn't necessarily want to feed into this thing where like rather than trying to solve a problem, like because I think a lot of doctors have sort of gotten into a habit of if there's any post-operation pain, they just kind of love to prescribe medicine. So I guess he really tries to navigate avenues like prior to having to prescribe medications such as muscle loosening injections and rehab processes and things like that. So that's mainly what he does, and it's something that he really seems to enjoy. And I think just in general, what his patients always end up extremely grateful. His patients always end up extremely grateful because obviously he's relieving their pain, and I just think that it's a really rewarding and it's just a really rewarding thing I think to be around when you're relieving people's pain.
Yeah, no kidding. And that's pretty honorable of him to try and avoid the whole pill mill of just handing out prescriptions, because obviously that's a huge problem right now, maybe even a big enough problem to name it a, what do they want to call it, like a national disaster, or like a, I don't know, whatever would give them the FEMA funding. But yeah, no, it's a big problem, and that's nice to hear that he at least is aware of it and trying to avoid it. How much of that would involve endocrinology, and like what? eh, So like I'm trying to understand medical school and like how they track people. Like if you would want to be an interventional pain specialist, would they just set you up with uh, one in the practice right now to give you a better idea of how that would work, or would they make you do like general? I don't know.
So my uncle actually, when he was in medical school, he initially what he started with was anesthesiology. But then he switched because I think in medical schools they actually have a track specifically tailored for pain and like orthopedics and stuff. Because ultimately it is neck and back pain. So you kind of go through the same medical school track that like someone who wanted to be, let's say, like an orthopedic surgeon or a spinal surgeon wanted to. You do it with them. It's just sort of when you do your residency is sort of where it really splits off because if you're doing a surgical residency, as an orthopedic surgeon or a spinal specialist or something, then you're going to be practicing with them. Whereas if you're doing a PM&R residency, which is pain medication and rehabilitation, then you would be with people who do rehab, people who do injections, people who see patients on a more and in general, the interventional part of it is what makes it procedural. And you do slight procedures where like I've been mentioning injections because that's really the main thing that's the main thing that my uncle does that brings in his money is he gives relieving injections to loosen up muscle tension and just areas like the shoulder and the lower back and the upper neck and that kind of thing. So you do it just with the same people who do the orthopedic thing. So I don't think it's that closely related to endocrinology because I believe endocrinology is the kidneys if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, is it? Oh, I thought that was just the nerves. My bad.
Oh no, I could be wrong. I'm not exactly. I'm pretty sure endocrinology is kidneys, but I could be wrong.
Yeah. Let's see. Endocrinology. Uh, hmm. We got adrenal disorder. I don't know. I'll figure that out later. I know it has to do with the endocrine system. Oh, wait. Here we go. Branch of biology and medicine dealing with the endocrine system. Well, what's the endocrine system? The endocrine system is a chemical messenger system consisting of hormones. Okay, so it's a hormone thing. Okay, so we were both wrong, but
Okay. Yeah. All right. Yeah, that's good to know.
all right. So I did end up sending you the picture of that rolling averages thing. Did it live up to your expectations?
Let's see real quick. Let me take a better look at it. MSO. How do I get into these messages? Let's see.
Just click on the top right of the window, not the X bar, but the
I think, top right. So I see a bar.
yeah. It should be
Hey, no, I found it.
okay.
All right, let's see. Let's take a look. Oh wow, that's crazy. Rolling average of sleep. Oh wow, that is insane.
Yeah, I'm surprised how professional it looks. Like it has the whole clustering thing where like you have a little trend line that you can make by going straight through the whole bar. But it's also weird that like it's so wavy as well. Like it goes and like it's weird also that it's wavy because like it's not like that's day to day. That's like month to month that it's like that. So it's kind of weird. But yeah, I don't know. It's interesting.
This is cool because actually last summer I was doing an internship at Northwestern where I was interning on a sleep study, and they were doing what they would do basically is they would give patients these things called ActiWatches, and the ActiWatch, what it would do is you would keep it on for a week straight, and it would basically show you like it exactly what this is basically. It would show you your sleep patterns and like how I guess it would sort of gauge how well the sleep you were getting, how long you were in REM sleep, and over the clinic in general. It was a clinical trial for patients who have sleep apnea or insomnia or feel like they might have one of those things. So yeah, it's cool. Yeah, I've definitely seen stuff like this before.
Yeah, and I probably do it in the least technical way in that I literally just write down the time that I'm 90% sure I went to sleep and 90% sure that I woke up. And by that, usually I'm within like 5 or 10 minutes, so it's not a big deal. But I tried using a Fitbit one time, and I don't know if I just got a bad Fitbit or something, but it did not work well for me at all. So I just went back to doing this method, and I'm pretty happy with the data overall. I don't like how it keeps trending up towards 8. If I had it my way, I would sleep probably 6.5 hours a night, but that's a bit low and probably better for my brain anyways, how unsuccessful I am with that, as you can see. But
Yeah, I gotcha.
but you did mention that, not principle, you mentioned the fact that some people come to the sleep study thinking that they have one of those illnesses and they don't. And obviously that's either nocebo or a psychosomatic illness. And I was curious to see what you think about those occurrences and if you think there's really any way to completely prevent them or if it's always just a rehabilitation from that and convincing someone that if they're not that they're wrong, that their symptoms aren't real.
Well, I mean, I think it's always tricky because it's difficult. I feel like it's always difficult just to tell someone else what is really going on with them because, like, at the end of the day, nobody lives inside of one person's body except for them. So it's really difficult to like just I guess straight up tell them that you're wrong like about what's happening with yourself. So I mean, I I feel like if it's something like insomnia or sleep apnea, where you're not necessarily prescribing medication to stop these things, because with sleep apnea, what they do is they just hook you up to a machine that helps you regulate your breathing throughout the night to help you sleep better. Because sleep apnea, what it does is it like closes up your throat and stuff, so you can't breathe properly, which I guess
Yeah,
causes you to wake up short of breath and all that stuff. So they just hook you up to what's called a CPAP machine, which is CPAP. I can't remember exactly what it stands for.
yeah, I'll check.
And then they give you that. But I feel like if you have a patient who's you know is I guess sort of in line, and like they have maybe one of the factors, because like obviously the factors are like obesity, age, if males are more likely for it than women are, so I feel like you could just sort of give it to them as long as you're not having to actually prescribe them any medication. I feel like you could just maybe start like give them maybe just a little bit of the treatment, just because I feel like, unless of course you have to like manage like a ton of patients, and obviously you don't have time to do that. But the study that I was on wasn't huge. Like we definitely would have had time to take in like an extra couple of patients if they thought it would help and stuff. So I think it really depends on what kind of setting you're working in. I feel like, unfortunately, if you are in a very large setting where you have to take in a lot of patients, then I feel like, unfortunately, you would just have to turn them away and say, like, I'm sorry, but we're not going to be able to treat you because you don't have anything that's showing up here, and we can't just take you just because you think that you might have an issue, because there's no evidence that you do. But I feel like, if you see like a little bit of evidence, but however, if you have more time and it's more flexible for you to be able to take on another case, then I feel like you could just have them in for a little while, maybe see if all they really need was, I guess, some sort of acknowledgement of the fact that they did have an issue. Because sometimes people just want to know that other people are also concerned with this issue that they're having, and I just feel like that can really help a lot more than some people might think. So you can just have them in for maybe 1 or 2 nights, have them hooked up to the machine, and then you never know, they might say that they feel better. But obviously, if it gets to be something recurring where they're always saying they have an issue and they're always have an issue, and then it becomes almost they become like hypochondriacs, I guess, sort of.
Yeah.
Then that's sort of where it becomes an issue where I guess you would have to step in and just say, like, I'm sorry, but we're not going to be able to do anything to help you.
Yeah, and apparently CPAP stands for continuous positive airway pressure, so that's good. Hopefully they don't have a negative setting on that. That would not end well. But yeah, the psychosomatic illnesses, what makes me think of them was a CGP Cray video I watched a while ago about internet-related diseases, and like the entire, not fallacy, but the belief that some people have that like they're allergic to the internet, and like they show headache symptoms of headaches, and like they go to isolated places where they're not going to be exposed to the internet. And I know, I don't know if you saw this show, I certainly didn't, Better Call Saul, which was supposed to be a prequel for Breaking Bad or anything.
Yeah, I've seen Breaking Bad. I haven't seen Better Call Saul.
Yeah, so like one of the main characters in that is portrayed as having I don't know what's an internet allergy. I don't know how they describe it exactly, and like he runs around in like a tinfoil vest basically, and like it's trying to shield himself from the internet. And like one of the big plots in the show is breaking that down and be like, no, you don't actually have an internet allergy. You're just not, if not making it up, then you just think that you do. But yeah, like it's really interesting when you have like almost hundreds of thousands of people that like all believe the same thing, and like the brain will compensate a lot for things that aren't actually around you. There was one other example of a psychosomatic, not psychosomatic, just a nocebo-related injury or illness where they're in like a Tennessee school system. I don't know how long ago this was. I think it was early 2000s, but obviously I'm kind of speaking out of thin air here, so I don't really know. Where this school teacher thought she smelled gas, and she's like, "Oh, it smells funny in here. It's kind of making me feel sick." And she said that to her students. And then some of her students went to the nurse, and they started reporting symptoms of feeling nausea and having headaches. And sooner or later, after enough students had left over the weeks, there was no students left in the class, and like eventually the whole school was having to get shut down so that they could get rehabilitation camps set up where they had to bring all the students and the teachers in and say, there's nothing actually in the school that should be making you feel this way. You don't actually have any illness, and there's no gas. You just think that there is. And when like you can create that big of a problem where like you shut down an entire school and just nothing can work because the brain thinks that something should be happening when absolutely nothing is happening, absolutely corroborates the whole mind versus mind over matter thing, which I never like it when people say that because it just sounds like some sappy allegory, but of course it does have some bearing in facts. And yeah, it's a pretty scary thing when it gets that out of control.
Yeah, definitely. I really think like the whole like the what can happen to the brain just in so many different ways, like what can make certain people believe things. It's always been something that interested me. Like that's really the only reason that I took AP psychology this year, was because all that stuff that's just makes people think differently, and just mental illness in general, like things like schizophrenia and just all that stuff that makes the mind function differently than, I don't want to say how it's supposed to necessarily, but just I guess from what's considered to have like a normal functioning brain, because obviously there's something different. I don't want to necessarily, it's not bad per se, because I'm not trying to say that it's obviously not like a choice or anything, but just I guess what's different. No, I'm not going to say that, but just different. Like what can make your brain, I guess, function differently or make you think differently? Because Mr. Clark was actually telling us a story about how he had like he was working, I think, as an intern for for something when he was like a junior in college, and he got a call like at this internship where like this guy would he's had like I guess a similar thing where he also kind of wrapped himself in tinfoil, and he was like, but it wasn't for the internet thing. It was like he was worried about aliens or something like
Hmm.
that, and he was like fully convinced that aliens were like spying on him or something like that. And obviously he had some underlying issue there, but it's just interesting to me how like things are so different for so many different people, because obviously it's a huge thing going on. Like obviously there are millions of people out there who have different functioning brains than millions of other people.
Yeah, well, I'm going to put a pin in that alien thing because that's certainly an interesting discussion point. But I'm also someone that's fascinated by psychology, but I've always, I know I've never talked about this with you, but a ton of the other people that have taken AP Psych have listened to me rant about how worthless AP Psych is and how much it doesn't actually teach you about the brain or.
It really doesn't. Yeah, I mean, he spent a lot of the. I really like Mr. Clark as a guy.
Yeah, no, fantastic.
In terms of just, did you take AP Psych this year?
No, I just ranted about why I knew more about AP Psych than anyone else, and they were taking the class.
Yeah, I mean, he focused a lot on things that really were not what like. Like when I took psychology, like when I signed up for psychology, I really thought it would be just stuff about how the brain works
Yeah,
and like how the thinking goes and just what different processes are. But it wasn't like that at all. Like I mean,
no,
we
it's
spent like
diseases.
we spent like 2 months talking about like the functions of the eye and like how eyes like the colors are transmitted in your eyes, and we talked about like the different parts of the brain. But I mean, I obviously you need to know that stuff if you're gonna pursue anything in psychology. Like it's important to know. I'm not disputing that, but just in terms of what you think when you think about psychology, like if you're going to be signing up for the class, then I feel like it's pretty obvious that you'd be more interested to know about like things like schizophrenia and depression and the things that affect the brain and that can change the brain, because and just I guess what gets people thinking the way that they do. Obviously there aren't answers for everything, but it would have been a lot more fun, I think, this year, and a lot more interesting, and a lot more it just would have been much less boring and much more entertaining of a class if you could actually learn about some of the things that really go into it, and what like the real issues are that psychologists in the real world are trying to solve and working on and stuff, instead of just talking about like this is this is this is the parts of the eye, this is the brain. These are the different psychologists of the past who had these theories. Some of that was pretty interesting, but then it sort of got a little old, and there came a point where we were just studying psychologists who really, it was just kind of irrelevant to study them because they really didn't have that much to contribute in terms of what the focuses are today.
Yep, cough, cough, Freud. But
Yeah.
yeah, I was actually impressed that he only went on about that for a day. I thought he would go on about that for a whole quarter for how much of dumpster fire he created in psychology in the early 20th century. But honestly, I think what schools really should do, and I think this is what colleges do, is they should just section psychology off and get rid of it, and they should just teach a AP neuroscience course and an AP sociology course. Because the biggest problem with psychology is it wants to be a blend of those two sciences. And in the same way that chemistry suffers from this in trying to blend biology and physics, psychology can't cover any of the great aspects of either because it has to combine the two too much, and even still, it has to focus too much on the biomechanics and studying stuff like how the eye works, or let's learn about the different parts of the brain. And like, you can't get into the weeds of any of either of the great things. You can't get into studying society and why people act in the way they do, and why megalomaniacs always rise to power and then always fall in a similar system of ways, and how, in terms of neuroscience, how most mental illnesses have to do with imbalances in terms of hormones and the different regulators that cause that, and the different uptake inhibitors that fail that cause the, well, I mean, regulators and uptake inhibitors are the same thing, but like just studying why these things occur in the brain and why, and like how it's set up, and like maybe like an interesting discussion of where does consciousness originate in the brain and stuff like that. That's fascinating to talk about, that you can't talk about if you only have a year to cover two different subjects. And that's a big problem in psychology, and one I also had in chemistry. The thing I always loved about chemistry was just looking at the periodic table and talking about the different elements and what's great about them, so I could almost think of them as if they were Legos or something, and like you can just build whatever you want in the universe, just with 118 different arrangements of protons, neutrons, and electrons, or not really neutrons. You got a lot more flavors there, but I always found that fascinating. You can have an entire universe of things with just, if not a handful, like a barrel full of elements, and that's just fascinating to me. But that was never focused on. It was always just, let's look at the biophysics and intermolecular forces, or oh, let's look at symmetry, which is really interesting. But we didn't get to the interesting part. We just did the whole seesaw, and oh, you got the trigonal planar, and just the boring stuff with that. And yeah, to make any subject interesting, you have to get into the weeds of it. And part of the problem with doing that is the people who don't care about the subject don't want to get into the weeds of it. But with an AP course, the people taking that course are more than likely willing to get into that. And it's just a disaster when you have a course like AP Psychology where it's just completely unable to do that, and people enter the class thinking that it's going to. But obviously, that's enough ranting against AP Psychology. But I'm actually curious to get your thoughts on like some of the concepts that you were curious about in psychology. I know you really wanted to know more about why diseases originate in the brain and stuff like that, because, well, you just said that a couple minutes ago. So, coming out of that course and from your outside knowledge, what is the Aradh Faruqi theory on how mental illness originates in the brain?
Well, it's an interesting question. What I honestly think it is I feel like I don't feel like anybody, and I could be wrong about this. I truly have no actual idea. But what I really think it is I think that as people grow up and as they're having different life experiences, I feel as if like one like your symptoms obviously like they're things to make you more prone to eventually developing a different disease. Like I think there's a thing like depending on how old a woman is when she has a child, like the child is more prone to eventually become a schizophrenic at this age, and that sort of thing. But ultimately, in terms of the other mental illnesses such as things like depression, anxiety, those sorts of things, I really feel like all of it stems from some sort of experience that a person has just at some point. Because obviously you always hear about when people lose someone who they really care about or someone that they loved in their life or something like that, then that's usually when the original symptoms start setting in. So ultimately, I think most mental illnesses really stem from experience and just either having to go through something that's traumatic in some way, or terrifying, or just something that I guess changes someone's perception of something. I just feel like that can really settle in with someone, and they get to thinking about it a lot, and then I just feel like eventually that sort of consumes them, and that's what sort of drives them to becoming what's characterized as mentally ill. And obviously it's different for everyone. Some people take things differently, and some people categorize their experiences differently, and some people take something different away from everything. And I just think that with that much variety of people's personalities in general and some people's approach to things, I just feel like it creates such a broad basis and so much for psychologists to have to analyze. So basically, if I were to give my answer and my theory, it would really just be based on the experiences that someone has grown up with. And I just feel like a lot of it has to do with the circumstances that you're brought up in as well. Because speaking for me personally, like I grew up very happily and very. I had a great life growing up, so I thoroughly enjoyed my childhood, and I enjoy the life that I have now. And very fortunately, I've been lucky enough to avoid having traumatic instances happen to me, and I've avoided all of that throughout my life. And as a result of that, I feel like I'm in a really good place in terms of my mental health, and I don't feel too down on much at all, really. And I just feel pretty good on a day-to-day basis. But obviously, that's different when some people grow up in extremely difficult circumstances, and they don't grow up under the best circumstances, and their parents can be tough, or just life in general, or something unfortunate and unforeseen can happen kind of out of nowhere, and then that just sort of shapes them for the rest of their life. And it's unfair how that happens to some people, but I really think that's what it is. I just think that it's a matter of chance, really, and just kind of what happens with in over the course of someone's life. But that's mainly what I feel like is the case in terms of things like depression and anxiety. But as far as schizophrenia, because schizophrenia obviously sets on later on in someone's life, it's not something that sort of it's also something that developed, but I think that really has a lot more to do with I'm not sure how to phrase it, because it's something that obviously requires something else other
Yeah,
than an experience, because like obviously you have the symptoms, and that are like include like hallucinations and
yeah,
auditory
like a
hallucinations.
lot of stuff has to go wrong for schizophrenia to happen.
Yeah, exactly, and that kind of thing. So I'm not sure. Schizophrenia is really the most interesting mental illness to me, because I'm just so interested in how it happens. Like, because it really just doesn't make any sense to me how like it's more common in men than it is women, and then there's a chronic type of schizophrenia, and then there's a I think an onset one, and there's two different types, and um, how somebody's brain gets to the point where they're having auditory hallucinations. Like I could never even imagine, hearing a voice in my head that wasn't my own, and it's just crazy to think that that's a real thing, and that's the one that fascinates me the most, and just to me would be the scariest to have to endure.
Well, if you want to experience auditory hallucinations, and this might be something we get into later, but just pay attention during dreaming. What do you think dreaming is? So,
Yeah, dreaming. That's another thing I really don't know. I think this. I really feel like dreams are. I feel like there's some sort of weird interpretation of just what's going on in your brain. Because I can't speak for everyone, obviously, but I always find that when I have a dream that I remember, um, whenever I have a dream that I remember, it's something that I can definitely relate or tie or connect to something that's going on in my actual life. I usually don't have those. Like I really don't recall ever having one of those outlandish dreams where it was just completely random, and it was just something that was completely out of the blue.
yeah, I'm with you
Like
there.
I always have like whenever I have a dream like that I remember vividly, I always remember being able to connect it to something that I was thinking about either the day before or the night before or something like that. Like just 2 nights ago, I had a dream, and it was something like the events in the dream were very easily connected to what I was thinking about like 2 or 3 hours before I had fallen asleep. So to me, that made sense. So I just feel like dreams are, in a weird sort of way, just a way of processing something in your brain and just kind of making a story out of
Well, yeah,
something.
yeah. My thoughts on dreams, and I'm not going to take credit for this. Is almost a direct adaptation of CGP Gray's definition of dreams, and I don't know if I've talked about him, but he's been a big influence on the way I think. Props to Hello Internet, the podcast. It's amazing. Check it out. But yeah, my thoughts on dreams are it's really, but is just your brain just goes into, if not a panic, then it's just it doesn't know what to do because too much of it is turned off, and like the parts that I forget what part of the brain is active during dreams, but it really doesn't matter. Whatever it is, it's not used to acting completely independently of the other parts of its brain because the brain is used to being interconnected. So when that one part of the brain can't function properly, it goes into a, if not a hallucination, then it just gets overwhelmed with a bunch of hormones. And when you're overwhelmed with hormones, your brain has to desperately try to uptake them as fast as possible. And usually that's when hallucinations start happening because the brain doesn't know how to deal with this massive influence of hormones. And usually hormones come from sensory input as well, or if not sensory input, then other parts of the body. So that's where I think hallucinations come from in that regard, and that's why we have dreams. Why, when we're just sitting there and well, not sitting there, hopefully not sitting down straight up and dreaming, that'd be bad for your back and neck. But whenever you're in your bed, let's say, or on the couch or wherever you're sleeping, your brain is just off, and you shouldn't have anything in front of your eyes or the part of your brain that perceives sight. But you do, and you go through these vivid hallucinations that you may not be able to perceive so well because the parts of your brain that perceive things are off, but you're definitely having them no matter what. And just during that point, you're just overwhelmed with a bunch of sensory input that you don't know where it's coming from. And part of the problem there is like I believe the sensory input part of the brain is on during that time. Really wish I could reference the actual parts of the brain, but that's the one thing I don't actually know about neuroscience. But yeah, just I feel like your brain is just overwhelmed at that point, and the only thing it can be overwhelmed with is the stuff that was already in the brain at that point, aside from the random hallucinations that just come from like a complete overload of hormones. So it just pulls out a bunch of parts of the brain that came from either the day of or the day before. So whatever the parts of the brain that's getting uptaken into the memory parts that, because you know how memory works, it takes a little bit to actually form a memory. So it has that in the brain. So it just starts molding a bunch of thoughts and stuff, and I feel confident in that because I know for me, a lot of the memories that I have about situations, I remember the dreams that I had of the situations that I had in real life more than the actual situations that I had in real life, which
That's
which is absolutely bizarre. And like, it's a dream, but you're like, gosh, is it really a dream? Because I feel like that actually happened. And yeah, it's a bizarre thing, and dreams are weird. But I, I feel fairly strongly that when the brain is just overloaded with hormones and doesn't know what's going on, it panics. It just does some crazy, crazy things. So that's where I think dreams come from, and that's where I think mental illness comes from as well. So I actually wrote a whole central dogma here of how mental illness originates, and obviously that's propping myself up a bit, but let's see how this goes. So the epigenome forces overabundance of hormones and overactivity in the brain, and with an unprepared brain, mental illness takes shape. So essentially what I mean by that is the epigenome is obviously the part of the brain that is affected, well, not the part of the brain really, the part of your DNA that's affected by your everyday interactions. And based on that, you get certain, Miss Johnson won't be so disappointed, whatever the things are that bind to the actual, God, is it tRNA or I don't know, whatever it is. There's these little things that bind to parts of your DNA and change it a little bit. They don't change like the actual codons or anything, but they'll change like maybe, I don't know, a couple base pairs here and there to basically change who you are based on stuff that happens in your everyday life. And there's a lot of evidence of this. There's evidence that smoking causes your epigenome to, if not fall apart, it just causes it to bring about some bad things in you. And I don't actually understand enough about the epigenome to really be talking about it here, but it plays a massive effect. And like we know that mental illness originates, for the most part, from experiences in life. There's very few that originate based on genetic precondition or heredity. So it's definitely coming from the epigenome based on that. And what the epigenome is, and really what how most of the brain acts, is it acts through a certain amount of hormones, and basically saying, do we want this amount of hormone? Do we want this amount of hormone? And obviously, with the endocrine system, you have hundreds of thousands of different hormones. We're not just talking about like a hormone for aggressiveness, a hormone for lust. We're talking about hormones that are influencing everything. We're talking about codominance. We're talking about just a whole swath of different, a whole cocktail of different hormones in your brain affecting everything that you're doing. And that also gets into my belief on free will that I'm going to put a pin in right now, because free will is a fascinating discussion. I can't wait to hear what you have to say about that. But yeah, I feel like hormones, if you have too much of one, then it's going to cause your brain to overreact in some way. And usually it's the overreaction that's the problem, just like in everyday life. When you have a fight or something, or not a fight necessarily, just like a situation in grade school or something, and like someone teases you or something, and then you say, yeah, shut up, and then you get in trouble and taken to the principal's office. Because it's not the action that causes the problem, it's the overreaction. And that also gets into a bigger belief I have, where everything acts in a similar way, and you can apply everyday life to really anything. I think that everything works in about the same patterns, and you can make a mathematical argument for why, but I'm not going to bore you with that. But yeah, so the epigenome forces overabundance of hormones and overactivity in the brain. So stop me here if you want to make any clarification of that or anything.
No, that makes sense.
Okay, so overactivity in the brain, what I just mean is some of the hormones, or I don't know if it's hormones necessarily, or just, yeah, I don't know if it's the hormones. Maybe there's another partner here. Maybe there's something triggering some nerves in your brain that are connected to certain hubs of axons or axons in your brain that are going to just create like an overactive part of your brain, yeah, but trying to think of a good analogy here. Well, I got nothing. So it just makes something overactive in your brain, and if you have like a certain amount of part of your brain that's just acting out too much, and it's just overactive, like let's say you're a sensory input gland. I'm going to call it a gland. It's not a gland, but don't have the name for it. And it's just overactive, which means that it's trying to perceive things that aren't there. So maybe that's where hallucinations come from. The brain thinks that it should be perceiving more things because the actual sensory input thing that's used to, let's say, running every 200 milliseconds or something, it starts running every 10 milliseconds. It's just going constantly and constantly. It's like, there's not enough perceptions out there. There's got to be something more. There's got to be. We're used to having more sensory input out there when it's not supposed to be. So it starts magnifying things that are much smaller, stuff like white noise that starts turning into, I don't know, let's say you got some scary wind. Ooh, it's scary. And then suddenly it just turns into voices. And it's because the brain is making more out of something that's not actually there. So maybe that's where hallucinations come from. That sounds pretty reasonable to me. But I mean, I feel like it can work in all senses of that. And going back to the hormones thing, with an unprepared brain, mental illness takes shape. So when you have an unprepared brain, it doesn't know how to deal with this overabundance of hormones, this overactivity. So it's going to overreact and say, we got to get this thing down now, guys. Our brain's going to explode if we got this many hormones. And it does that. And I feel like it creates problems like depression, where if you have too much dopamine, if you have too much, I want to say serotonin, I don't know if that's another happy hormone or not, but when the brain thinks that it has too much of something, it tries to force it back down, and when it does, it lowers you too much. So now you got a bigger problem on your hands, and the brain thinks, hey, that works pretty well, we're going to stick with what we did that time because it's efficiency-minded. It doesn't want to create a perfect system, it wants to create a system that worked that one time and is going to work in the future. So it gets stuck with a bad system, and then your brain, with its epigenome screwed up, it just keeps pumping out too much hormones, your brain keeps lowering it, and then mental illness begins to take shape. So that's a big part of the problem there. And I mean, I think that's most of the problem. And that also gets into something that I think about drugs, is that it's not the effects of the drug that are the problem. It's not, when you take cocaine, it's the problem isn't that you have way too much dopamine rushing through your brain. The problem is your brain lowers you so far after that to be like, okay, we had way too much dopamine in there. We don't want him that happy, guys. Come on, he's got to get some work done. So it just lowers it basically to the ground force. It's like, we're going underground here. We got to get this guy under control. So you just become horrendously depressed after you take cocaine. And obviously that's a bad example because you can have a heart attack or something. But I don't know, let's ignore the heart attack. You just have that and you just get out of it and you have the worst withdrawal ever because of it. You become super depressed. You want to commit suicide because you're like, oh my god, I feel horrible. This life sucks. And that's the real problem there. And I'm not saying that scientists should be investigating in ways to fix brains, a reaction matrix, let's say that, because obviously that's not going to work. Everything in excess eventually results in problems. That's a good lesson from life, but I'm just saying, like, it's always the overreaction that's the problem, and it's always the system that tries to manage the problem too well that just creates a problem, and then you have everything fall apart. So I think that's where mental illness comes from. I think that's, well, yeah, this only really deals with mental illness. I'm going to try and broaden it further, but that's my theory personally, and I would love if you had some way to counter me on this so we could get a real intellectual debate going here.
To be honest with you, I really don't, because yours makes a lot of sense to me.
Damn.
I think you got the wrong guy. But no, that I've actually never thought about it that way. But when I was listening to you talk about, like, in terms of how you think about the overreaction and then needing to bring it down but going a little bit too far, to me that actually does make quite a bit of sense. So I actually wouldn't refute you on that, because to me it's actually way too logical for me to say that it's wrong, because I'm not that educated on this myself. So, to me, it actually sounds like a really good theory. It'd be interesting to see if you could take that up with maybe a professor in college.
Oh, exactly. That would be what I would love to do. And then some neuroscience scientist comes up and he's like, well, actually, and I just get put in my place. But that's always far more interesting when at least you take a stand on it. No, nobody ever wants to talk to the person. It's like, I don't know. Who knows what it is? Because, I mean, that's how you end your conversation right there.
No, to me, it's crazy, just like how everything is just so different for different people. I really just think that it's weird how, like, the brain is just so complex, and I feel like it's just something that there will never be, like, enough answers for, because I just feel like with new people being born all the time, and everybody growing up differently and everybody having different experiences, I just feel like there's always going to be something new or something different, and I just feel like it's going to be one of those things that's going to have, I feel like it's going to have people stumped and thinking and always thinking about new ways. And I just think it's going to be something that's going to be going on for the, certainly I think for the rest of our lifetimes and probably even like our kids and grandkids and all that stuff. I think it's going to be crazy to see how over time scientists and psychologists and neuroscientists and all these people handle this, because I don't think there's ever going to be something where you can just say, oh, cure for depression, and never be depressed again. Because like I said earlier, I just don't think that. I just think different people's experiences will always stay with them differently. But in terms of what you're saying about the overreaction, if there was some way to maybe stabilize it to like not, I guess, push it down all the way, which is obviously I'm assuming what antidepressants try to do and
Yeah.
that sort of thing. But obviously those can only work so well because I've really never spoken to anyone who's taken an antidepressant and thinks that it's really helped them like immensely. I just feel like they kind of feel sad about the fact that they have to take it.
I mean, it's the last resort. It's just from the people I've talked to about it, it's just they feel like they don't have a choice at that point.
Yeah, and then I just feel like it really doesn't like they seem to act like it's exactly what you're saying. It's like they have to take it, and when like you speak with them about it, it's not like they never speak about it in a positive perspective. That's like, oh, it's really helping. They're just kind of like yeah, like I have to take this now. Like it's just kind of happening. Like it doesn't really seem like it's aiding their mood in any way, which is it'll be interesting to see how science develops and where that takes it in the next couple of decades. I'll be really interested to explore this one, when I'm older, just to see where it's at. Because, like I said, I think it's going to be something that's going to be around for a long, long, long time.
Yeah, truly, the brain is medicine's final frontier. If you just look at it, we're almost there in curing all the diseases or curing ailments in the rest of the body. But with the brain, we've got a lot of work to do, and hopefully people
Yeah.
are investing a lot of money in it, and we can get those damn pharmaceutical companies that are just creating bad drugs that are only designed to create side effects that will continue so that you have to find another drug for it. If we can get some actually good drugs going here where it's not just, I mean, it's not just a pill mill, sure, but not just designed around making money. We can make some real progress, but obviously you can never counter market forces. You have to work within them. And that's kind of why I hate politics as well. But I'm not going to get into that because I have 4 topics pinned here. And if I break out politics, I'm never going to get back to these. So, on the topic of basically what future people are going to have to deal with the brain, I think a lot of people interested in computer science, they would argue that we're not going to have to worry about that much in the future because AI is going to be something that just replaces the need for the human brain and problems that we have to deal with today in society, a lot of them coming from anxiety, obviously. We're not going to have to worry about those much anymore once AI becomes strong enough that it becomes better than the human brain. So I have 2 questions here. So one, do you think that AI can eventually get to a point where it becomes better at being the human brain than the human brain, or at least becomes indistinguishable from it? And then 2, how do you think we're going to deal with a situation where that's the case and the robots are better at doing everything than humans are? And to quote a CGP video title, that humans need not apply.
See, my thing with, I mean, like I've always really thought about, because I don't know if you're familiar with the show, but there's a show called Battlestar Galactica.
No, I haven't watched it, but I've heard of it.
And it's basically what happens is these humans build these things called they build these things called Cylons, where exactly for that purpose they build them with extremely intelligent, like extremely great artificial intelligences, and they power them to do the work for humans and stuff. But eventually, because they made the artificial intelligences so smart, the robots rebelled against the humans because they were so smart, and they just eventually started terrorizing the humans and stuff, and they basically took over the entire world. So all that stuff. So I mean, that's because I watched this, like I watched a couple episodes of the show when I was probably around 8 or 9. So ever since then, it's kind of had me a little bit on edge about buying into the entire thing with AIs and the future and just robots in general. But in a realer sense, now that I'm obviously 9 years older than I was then, it's to me I don't think that you can ever have something that replaces a human, because the reality of it is, in my opinion, unless you're building a robot that's at the end of the day, it's still something that's being manufactured and something that's being built. And because of that, I feel like it's always going to be able to some degree be controlled. And like at the end of the day, it is still artificial. Like there's a reason that it's called an AI, an artificial intelligence, instead of just an intelligence. And I just feel like that's always going to be the thing that differentiates humans from whatever we have in the future. And I just think that freedom, like the free will and just humans being able to make their own choices, I think is always going to be something that's. I don't think that we'll ever get to a point where some sort of technology is just going to become more than that, and where it's going to become more valued than that. I just feel as though, to me, it's just it. Part of it is because it's so hard to fathom just humans no longer being relevant, I guess. But I do I do strongly believe that humans, I think, will always have something in this world simply because we're the only ones who humans are gonna be the people who have to build those artificial intelligences. So I feel like to a degree they'll always be somewhat superior to them. I don't think that they'll ever be able to. And now, in terms of what it's capable of, strictly in terms of what it's capable of, I do think that it can get to a point where it can be either better or non-distinguished, or you couldn't distinguish between an artificial intelligence and a human brain. I do think that that's possible. I do think that eventually technology will catch up, and it'll be to a point where we can build robots that can do all the things that a human can do. Because you see so much already, like Teslas can drive themselves, and like you already see stuff like that. And then you have fully functioning robots, and obviously you've seen those crazy news stories from time to time about like a robot getting granted citizenship and stuff. And it's 2018
Wait, what?
right now, so
I actually have not heard that news story. Is that a thing?
I saw it on Twitter. It was something about a robot named Sophia getting granted citizenship somewhere, and a lot of Twitter was having a storm over it because it was saying all this political stuff about how, oh, you won't grant like people who are crossing the border
Oh
citizenship.
God!
And
Of course, they would go there. They're
yeah,
not
so
actually going to talk about the issue. They're just going to bring in their own problems.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I mean, that was crazy when I read that. I actually didn't click on it and read it all the way through because I was just that's crazy, but. It is something that I saw. I'm really not sure what all the details are on it. I'm not sure if it went all the way through, but I do think that technology is going to get so great to a point where we are going to be able to have that. But in terms of it replacing humans, or I don't think it'll ever get to that. I feel like at most, I feel like they'll be able to coexist with us, and I just feel like. But at the same time, I also don't feel like it's going to be a thing where like you're sending your kids to school and they're like, oh, look at this robot friend I have. I don't think it's going to be like that.
Okay.
So yeah, I think that it'll be interesting to see as it goes on. Hopefully, the humans don't try and completely exploit them and use them as tools, because obviously, if you're going to build something,
They will.
Yeah, they will, but hopefully there's something that kind of regulates that, because I just feel like if you're going to build something that has an intelligence, it's going to be able to develop to some degree its own emotion. And if it's constantly having to do work for, like, I don't know, I just feel like it really could turn bad, because obviously, the fear of a robot overthrow is, in some ways pretty legitimate.
Yeah, and also the whole problem around regulating robots. Governments are notorious for lagging behind technology terribly, and just some of the stuff even in the U.S. system, but in systems abroad, like they just don't have any regulations right now around it, and stuff like drones being on the market for 3 years before they got any regulations by the FAA, or stuff like the internet copyright system being horrendously outdated, even though the internet's been around for 20 years, and just yeah, I mean, it's pretty clear that governments lag terribly behind the progress of technology. That's always how it is, and in a way, that's how the U.S. government is designed. It's designed around the premise that if you wait out a problem, either it'll become a big enough problem that it needs to be addressed, or it just disappears. And unfortunately, with technology, you can't do that, because technology doesn't lag behind. It only just improves and improves at an accelerating rate, and the more you fall behind initially, the farther and farther you fall behind farther along, and more and more people are exploited because of that. So that's a political theory right there. But I'm glad you have that position, because that actually sets up perfectly the argument that I wanted to have about free will. So I'm actually a really big believer in the fact that free will doesn't exist. And I'm going to have to frame this carefully. So Here, let me crack my knuckles and get ready for this. So, okay. I've had this discussion a couple times. I think once with Andrew in one of the earlier podcasts, but free will, essentially the premise behind free will. Well, here, give me your definition of what free will is.
I feel like it's just really the ability to, in my opinion, it's just the ability to say no. And I guess once you choose to not be controlled, I feel like you're solidly able to make that decision and just say no.
Okay.
Obviously, there are going to be certain situations where you're forced to do something that you really don't want to, but just in terms of what free will is, it is the ability to say no and see that all the way through and actually not have to do something if you're being told to, and just I guess freedom to make a decision as to whether or not to do something.
Okay, the freedom to make a conscious choice. Gotcha. So, essentially, my reasoning, and once again, I'm stealing from CGB Grey here, but the reasoning behind why free will doesn't exist is a theory that I talked about with Reed and Bijan in podcast. Let me get the number because I know you guys love hearing the actual number, so you can go listen back to it. I don't know if you guys listen back to it, but I'll keep giving it to you. Topical 34. We had like a 30-minute discussion on absolute determinism and how any choice and anything really in the universe can be rooted back to its causes. And based on that, the causes can always be held responsible for an action occurring. And based on probabilistic modeling, you can begin to predict which are going to occur, but you can have anything within a sample set, just to use a AP stat term that you're aware of, any choice that you could have made was within the sample set that came from those causes. And any of those based on hormone imbalances or just hormone equilibriums in the brain or social factors or just the mindset that you had at the time would lead you to that choice, regardless of what you consciously felt like. So so that's really the big contingent thing. And an example I would have, this is what I was struggling with last time, coming up with a real example for this. So let's see. Okay, well, I'll give an example of the current situation. So why did I want to talk about the discussion of free will? So you can look at the causes for why I tried to bring back up this discussion as I find it an interesting argument. So the selfish perspective. Also, that I think it's an important thing for people to know about. Also, because it came up in a podcast 5 episodes ago and I wanted to rekindle that debate. But then there's also the factor that I thought it would be interesting for you to hear about it. But then there's also the factor that I knew you had the opposite stance, so I knew that would create a more interesting debate, which can be tied back to the fact that I like being competitive, and I find it much more interesting to have a discussion with someone who's on the opposite side of me if I think that I can have a possibility of changing your mind, which I feel like I do with you. I think you're a pretty open-minded person, but I also know that it's not going to be easy, which makes it a lot more fun. So there's that, and you have all those factors. I think I listed off at least 8 there that are all leading into this one choice. And there's also the factor of, but gosh, I don't want to make myself sound silly. I don't want to come off as not understanding a topic here. So maybe I shouldn't talk about free will here. So now you have a binary choice where you have 2 options, and they're both, if not equally likely, they both have some probability of happening. And you could see me not talking about it. Maybe I'm not feeling comfortable about it. Maybe I want to go back to talking about the aliens. So any choice that you did make can be rooted back to the causes and really if not the connections in your brain, then just the entire system. And in the same way that a function based on all of the factors that are going into it spits out a result, I think that's how the brain works, and I think that's how choice works. And I think the fact that we think that we made a choice is if not a rationalization, then let's say a security protocol by the brain trying to make you feel good, to make you feel like you have some control in your life. Because obviously the big reason why a lot of people commit suicide is either they don't feel like they have control in their life or they feel bad about their life because of their actions. And I feel like if a lot of people felt like they didn't have any control over their actions, they'd be like, well, screw this. Why am I living? And that's it's obviously not healthy. So you're not going to have any computer scientists coming out and being like, yeah, no free will, guys. Sorry. And that does sound a bit conspiratorial, but I mean, you don't want to do that if you're in a position of power. People are going to take you seriously with that. But yeah, I feel like if you can tie anything back to anything, which I think you can in the universe, I think that's how it works, is just everything is tied to everything. And with 6 degrees of separation, that is especially obvious to people today. But if you can always tie it back to that other thing, then how can you say that you made the decision for it to go there, other than you feel like you did? So that's pretty much my argument there. And I mean, honestly, absolute determinism is something that I don't like because it makes it's a very difficult concept to accept the fact that anything can happen at any point, and that I mean it's just very difficult to understand, honestly, especially in where most humans are more comfortable with linear thinking, where like you get to point A via point B by doing a couple actions, and it's going to take you there. But that's the path that you were going to take no matter what, because you knew that you wanted to take that path. But if you suddenly have a whole matrix, and you have a matrix of factors, and you have a matrix of starting points even, and then you have a matrix of endpoints, and any of one of them can happen at any time, and you can't control it, it becomes a difficult thing, and it's a difficult thing to accept, along with just being comfortable with, really. And another example I have is, well, dealing with this podcast right now, is talking. So think about when you're talking. Why do you say the things that you want to say when you're talking? So maybe you pre-planned the topic that you wanted to go into. Maybe you knew the direction that you wanted to take the conversation, but did you plan out every single word that you were about to say? No, you didn't. You just said them. And you said them, why? Because your brain came up with it. But do you feel like you have a choice over what you said? You see, you do feel like you had a choice over what you said, but you had no actual control over what you said. And I think that's a good example of what I mean, if not by absolute determinism, then just a lack of free will coexisting with a supposed free will. And I think that about sums up the argument there. And frankly, I'm really curious to see what you have to say about that.
See, so I understand what you're saying, and what you like. I understand. Like, I wouldn't, if somebody had presented that to me, I wouldn't disagree with it. Like, I wouldn't shut them down and say like, oh, that's ridiculous, because I completely understand what you're coming from. Because obviously there have been points, like obviously like in my life, where I've also felt like I did that and like that's what happened, but did I really, like, is that really what I wanted to do? Like, I completely understand what you're saying. However, just obviously just for the sake of discussion and debate, what I feel what differentiates is how like what you can do is the ability to change your own mind. I feel like is something that not necessarily contradicts that, but just sort of, I guess, throws a little bit of a wrench in it, because like free will, for example, like if I'm going to buy a car, right, and I'm just deciding between, and there's no real like there's not necessarily a huge I guess detriment to getting either of the cars that I'm going to buy. Like, let's say that I'm going to buy like a Mercedes or a BMW or something, then then it's like you would be able to choose what you wanted simply based on what you desire more. You wouldn't really have to think about you wouldn't really have to think about necessarily a detriment to getting either, because both would be good choices for you. Like, it's not like you suffer if you get either. So when you're making that decision, you can ultimately just pick whichever one you prefer. And in a case like that, I really feel like it's just a matter of what you prefer. And when you're just picking between things that you prefer and what you'd rather have, where there's no real downside to getting either, then I feel like it is kind of a free decision, because you're really just picking whichever one you like more. And it's not like there's, I feel like, a negative there, which I feel like there would have to be if you didn't have a free decision. Because if you're not making a free decision, then I feel like there's going to be some sort of negative tie to it, because it's like you're being forced to do something almost. But you wouldn't be doing it in a situation like that where you're just picking between two things that you like.
Okay. Well, first off, I'll use a mathematical analogy that I really like, that everything breaks down at its asymptote. And when you're making a decision when it's 50-50, when it's 40-40-20, the logic is going to break down, and it becomes just a question of very slight factors. Maybe one proton bounces, or one atom bounces one way on an axon, and that, or axiom, I forget what the actual term is, and that sways it in favor of one of the other ones. Or I mean, it just becomes a very tough thing to track, especially at its asymptotes and when it becomes really close. But I'll ask you to continue that example with, where did your desire for it come from that eventually led you to choose that car? Or because I understand the whole thing with the negative return, and I don't necessarily agree with that, because I think that you can have, there are plenty of choices that exist in the world where you can have two equally, if not equally beneficial. One, well, here, I'll say this. So it doesn't necessarily have to be negative return, but if there's a drop off from one choice to the other, there's your negative return. So I'll say that. But so where do you think your desire comes from? Where do you think, I don't know, let's say you really liked red cars or something, or you had a red car and a blue car. You wanted the red car because you want to be cool and you want to be sporty. But where does that want come from?
I think I see what you're saying now. So that's actually interesting that you use a color example, because this is what I was going to ask you. So like, I guess I'll answer your question with a question.
Ooh.
Like, if if I'm choosing between two cars, and like if I'm choosing between Mercedes and BMW, and I'd be extremely happy with both of them, it really doesn't matter to me which one I have, and I would just really be happy to have either. But one of them is black and one of them is if one is black and one is white, okay, and I prefer to have the black one. Are you saying then that if I choose the black one, I didn't really choose to have the black one, but the fact that the other one was white is the reason that I chose the black one? Therefore, the colors of the car, which was pre-established before I was even considering, that already had made the decision for me? Like, is that what you're saying?
Well, everything is taken in context. If you have two cars and that changes that are black, that changes the decision. If you have different shades of gray cars, well, that becomes a different decision. But yeah, I think the brain operates, and really anything operates. I'll give another example of what I'm talking about. In just life dictates how the entire universe works. How do businesses operate? Businesses operate not to create the biggest, well, good businesses, I should say, not startups that are just trying to strike rich, because those guys are just trying to shoot for the jackpot, because that's all you can really do. You're not going to impress people by being marginally better than everyone else. You got to be way better and do something no one else is doing. So obviously those guys are shooting for the moon. But a normal business, when they make decisions to okay, how do I word this? They make decisions so that they maximize, or I should say not maximize, they minimize the potential detriment that can come out of making that decision. They don't maximize the potential not shortfall, return that they can get by making it. They do it so that they can protect themselves. And that's what I think the brain does as well. When it makes the decision to go for the car that's black over the car that's white, it's going with the more secure choice, the choice it's more comfortable with, because the brain operates in a way where it doesn't want to take risks if it doesn't have to. If it's not in a situation where it's beneficial to take a risk, you want to take a risk, and something in your mind is making you want to take that risk. But going back to that business, let's say that they have to decide between on a company car, and they can go for a company car from a startup company that looks really promising, but you don't know how well it's going to do. But if you invest in this company at this time by buying this car, you might get a really good deal if it becomes a really big car company in the future, a new Mercedes-Benz, a new Ferrari. But if that company fails and you invested in this car, your company's going to look stupid. And it's going to be like, what are you guys driving around that? I can't think of a bad car brand right now, but why are you driving that Ford, like you're in China or something? Nobody drives Fords here. And you had thought that the company was going to do really well and that your company would be on the cutting edge if you had invested in Ford in China. So you went for shooting the moon. But that's not what companies do. They take the safe choice. They say, what's the biggest car brand in China? Let's just go with that one, because that one's safer. If we go for the one in the Ford car in China, maybe it'll be really good for us, but it has a much higher potential to go bad. So let's not do that. And I think that's the same way that the brain works. It tries to minimize the potential detriment that comes to you, even if you miss out on a higher return choice. So That's how I think that the brain works in that. That's how I think everything works in everything. Is just it's always trying to minimize the potential harm that comes to you.
Right, and I think I feel like if I was under the belief that when you like as you grow up, if different things establish your preference for certain things, like if you like while you're growing up, right? Like let's say that you're just surrounded in like let's say like you live in like a house where the theme of your house is just darker. Like the walls in your house are gray. You have darker hardwood floors, and in general, you don't live in like a vibrant, colorful house or something. And then as a result of that, like as a result of where you grew up, which is a choice that you did not make, you end up having a preference for darker colors,
Yeah.
which is leading you to just in general sort of liking like like rather than having something bright red or something like light blue or something, you always prefer to have something that's like gray or black or something.
Yeah, you feel more
I
comfortable with
understand
it.
what you're saying, and that actually does make a lot of sense because if you can't control why you have a preference for something, then it makes sense as to why you would think that you don't really have a choice in what you end up picking because that preference that you have was established by something that you couldn't control. So if you're going by degrees of separation, then I actually do agree with you. For me personally, I stand by the idea that like, because what you were saying earlier about like when you're speaking, right? Like and you said that we might not you don't always have a choice about like the words that you say and you're not necessarily controlling what you say, you're just kind of speaking based on what your brain is basically like commanding the ship and you're just kind of speaking words that kind of go along with the topic that you have in mind, which I agree with because sometimes obviously when you're not fully informed on something you'll just talk it out and like your brain will come up with something for you to say.
Yeah.
But at the same time I feel like the reason that I do believe in that there is some degree of free will because I agree with you in the sense that there are multiple cases where your free will really doesn't pull through, or there are some cases where it's really just not there. And it's just kind of you feel like you're doing it, but you're not actually doing it. It's just something that was pre-established for you. I just do think that there are certain cases because, for example, like I could stop in the middle of I could stop in the middle of speaking right now and just say the F word really loudly, but I'm choosing
Please
not to do
don't.
that. Yeah. And like I'm choosing not to do that, right? But like if free will didn't exist, then I feel like I might just do it anyway. Like if I did do that, I don't feel like anything would be controlling me not to do that, other than the fact that I simply don't want to. Like I feel like I'm making a conscious choice to not do that, and for that reason, I just feel like I don't think I wouldn't buy into any argument that's like, oh well, the reason that you're not doing it is because that. I just feel like it would be you'd have to go back too far, I think, almost to explain why I wouldn't do that. It would be like, oh well, that it's not really acceptable for you to just stop in the middle of speaking to someone and just swear. Like that that's wrong, and that because you were raised like this. But if you were raised under different circumstances, then maybe you would say this. But I just think that that's really something that kind of involves a little bit too much, just for my personal liking, because I mean, I feel like I'm pretty in control of the words that I'm speaking to you right now in this moment. I feel like I'm pretty in control of them, and I don't think that I feel like if I stopped in the middle of what I was saying right now and just said that word really loudly, I do think that I would be the one making that choice, and I feel like I'm not the one. I just feel like I'm making a choice not to do that, and if I did do it, I would be the one making a choice to stop and do that. Unless, of course, like if I stubbed my toe on my desk or something, then I just screamed it. Like that would be caused by something else, and that's not necessarily free will. But if I'm just sitting here casually talking right now in the middle of the sentence and I just blow up and say the F word, I feel like I'm the one that made that decision.
Okay, and I guess that would get into our fundamental disagreement then. That I probably just based on years of believing this and just growing more comfortable with absolute determinism, just I've become more accepting of what I think is the truth. That like any choice can be reduced to that certain boundary, and like my approach to what you just said, where like there's a certain chance that you'll just stop everything and shout out the F word or something, which I think would be a common argument people would use on that. Is just, but why don't I just do this crazy thing? What's stopping me from doing that if I have no control? So like I'm of the belief that it's just an absolute equilibrium, and if you got to a point where you didn't, and I say you in the abstract because obviously you're not the kind of person that would just get angry about it, but like if someone was angry enough and had enough hormones in like a certain place where they're like, no, I gotta really show my belief that this thing doesn't exist and that I had control in this situation and I could just say it, thunk, and they just do that all of a sudden. They did it because they were angry about it, but they were angry about it because they wanted to defend their position. They wanted to feel more secure in their prior belief, and in doing so, they confirmed absolute determinism. But I absolutely understand. I feel like it's too much. Like it's hard to accept because, as I said, even feeling like this for 3 years, absolute determinism sucks because it's just a pain. It really is, and honestly, it's just a problem of information overload and just accepting the fact that like the decision matrix is too great and you can't understand it fully because, well, the brain is the most complicated machine in the universe, at least right now. And it's a biological machine on top of that. It doesn't function in any machine that we know right now. But I'm of the belief that anything that can exist right now can be repeated. And why is that the case? Because it exists in the first place. And like I'm a really big believer in that, much more so than absolute determinism, that anything that has happened can happen again. So because of that, I don't see any reason why we can't make another brain synthetically even, or just from a bunch of other parts. And I can accept the argument that there is something special about the brain because it is a biological system, and maybe there is something about biology that you just can't accomplish without it. You can't accomplish without the complex interactions and intermolecular forces that are holding things in certain places. But I think you can get pretty freaking close with a bunch of machines and a bunch of metal. And even if not, you always see in these sci-fi movies and not sci-fi movies because that sounds like something from the 80s, but you see like in science fiction where most of the time it's not the machine that's becoming completely metal and taking over the world. It's a machine that has some biological element to it as well. And at least in good science fiction, not like some Terminator thing where it's just completely metal, but like it has some biological component to it as well. And through the melding of metal and life, at least life as we know it right now, you get something that's stronger. You get an android, and that's why I think that it can be done, and that's why I think that it will be done. Because technology just doesn't stop, even when it probably should for humans' sake. People just keep pushing and pushing and pushing because there's something in the human desire that just wants to keep improving. And it is weird that that's the case, but it'll happen regardless, and regardless of whatever Luddite wants technological progress to stop. So I think that pretty well flushes out my feeling on that.
Well, see, I actually I like your theory a lot because I completely understand what you're like. I like I personally like I enjoy the fact that everything that happens like has reasoning behind it and like has like a chain of events that's linked to it. The only thing because I'm not opposed to accepting this because I would be completely fine with it because ultimately like I mean I like to think of myself as a pretty carefree individual. Like I don't really have any sort of I don't have a pension or a desire or any sort of you know like I don't really care whether or not I'm super in control of situations.
Yeah,
And I just feel like I really don't mind that much. Like it's like if I can't control something, then I just kind of go with it.
yeah. I mean,
So like
as long as it's fun.
yeah, exactly. Like I really don't mind unless it's something that's displeasing. Then obviously that's the only time when I would like to have control of the situation to stop it. But as far as day to day life goes, like like I really just kind of take everything just as it goes, and I just really I enjoy living that way. So I don't have any issue with this theory. But the only thing that I guess sort of questions me on fully believing whether or not the whole concept of free will exists is just like I just feel as though what the chain of events that leads up to you making a certain decision, I feel like what it does more of is sort of, I feel as if it puts you in a position and makes you much more inclined to choose, what one of your options. But however, I still feel like making the final decision in the actual moment of getting there, like when you're right in that moment, I feel like right then when it's a split second decision, I just feel like you have to have a little bit of control because ultimately, you do have you have a control of your arm to like move something to do something like let's say like peer pressure is something that's obviously involved in this whole thing of free will, right? Because that changes your everyone says that peer pressure changes what you really want to do and all that stuff, right? So like if something was in front of me and someone was like, hey, kid, like you should try this, you should do this, right? And like if like hypothetically, like if someone wanted to, but then ultimately they decided like, oh, like I'll pass, like I'll walk away, I won't pick it up, like I won't do this, like I won't reach out my hand to take it from you and stuff. I just feel like ultimately, like in that moment, I feel like even though you decided not to do it, and that decision not to do it is related to the fact that you were raised not to try this, and you were raised not to do this from strangers, and you were raised not to be put in these situations, and you've always been told not to do this, which ultimately led to you making that decision. I agree with that, in that those are the reasons why you made that decision. That's why what happened ended up happening, and there's reasoning for why that happened. However, just feel in that split second when you decided, like, I'm not going to do this, that moment itself, I feel like you have control over whether or not you had said the word yes or said the word no. However, I do agree with the fact that there is reasoning that you can trace back as to why you made every decision. The only difference for me is, just like what I said before, like me not stopping in the middle of this and saying the F word. I just feel like there's a little bit of choice involved in just whether or not you ultimately do the action, because ultimately you are in control of, I think, your body, and where you decide to move and how you decide to move your legs and what you decide to pick up and when you decide to extend your arm. And because also another question that I would have, I guess, is just like, if you're not controlling yourself, then what is making these decisions other than just your brain? Because I like the theory of what you're saying as to how it's like almost like the brain is not necessarily a part of us. It's more like we are, like the brain is
We are an
like
extension
we
of it.
are for the brain, like we are servants of our brains rather than the brain being a part of us, which is a cool theory to think about. I actually really enjoy that.
Yeah, and I mean, I think a good way of thinking about it as well is just we are a projection of what is in our brains, and through that we can interact with the rest of the world. And honestly,
Yeah,
and a big part of why I'm so accepting of this theory is just something that I've always had inside of me. And yeah, that sounds really stupid. I'm going to start that over. So, why I think I've been so accepting of the whole thing around free will is just I'm far more accepting of positions that I feel like I can completely understand than ones that I don't understand. Because I'm a humongous believer in and I know I've been saying I'm a big believer in a lot of things, but I am a big believer in a lot of things. But especially so, I'm a big believer in Occam's razor, the theory that the thing that makes the most sense, or the outcome that requires the fewest logical, if not inconsistencies, like it causes requires the fewest logical breaks, the fewest breaks in efficiency in mental function, will occur the majority of the time. And essentially, that's Occam's razor right there. And I wrote a whole paper about it in what was it, 10th grade, I guess. Curran gave it like an 85 or something. It was like not enough cowbell or something, but yeah, I don't. But yeah, I'm hmm, yeah, like if crap, I completely lost my train of thought. I shouldn't have tried to break in a Seinfeld reference.
I think I know what you're getting at. I think I what should make the most sense is ultimately what you feel like is going to make sense, just because, like you said, like it's much more easier to comprehend and much more everybody. I feel like this goes for everybody. So
Okay, hang on a second. I'm gonna stop you there because I just realized what I was trying to say again. So
okay.
it has nothing to do with Occam's razor specifically, which you would think, because that's where I lost my train of thought. But it all has. I know I completely set you up for that. I apologize, but no, it all has to do with just. I feel like I understand absolute determinism fairly well, and I understand how the brain could function in that. But what I don't understand is I don't understand how free will would work. I don't feel like I understand consciousness in the brain, which definitely exists. So like that's not something you can refute because I can see out of my eyes right now. But like if I understood free will and I felt like I understood how control would work in the brain and why and like how making a decision as in like in a free will sense making a decision would work, I would be willing to accept it. It's just the problem of I don't feel like it makes sense, and I feel like it's contingent on either the idea of a spirit, and I don't mean to denigrate your opinion there because I'm sure you feel like that's a little silly as well, but just like I don't feel like I understand it. And I'm not asking you to explain it because I know you don't understand it either. Because if you did, you would have written a book and made millions of dollars. But like, I just don't understand how it would work, and I don't expect anyone to tell me how it would work. So I'm just going to take the opinion that I feel more secure in because I feel like I have a complete understanding of it. And there's always people in history, or not even history, just people in science where they'll take the position that makes sense, and the one that makes sense isn't always the one that's correct because you're missing a couple factors that you weren't aware of at the time. Like plenty of times, you'll chalk something up, you make like a discovery in science, and then their conclusion they write, oh, maybe it had to do with this, or maybe it had to do with that, but it just had something to do with something that was completely out of left field, and you're like, well, how did it have to do with that? But then you realize, oh wait, that's actually connected in these two ways that we didn't realize at the time, because it was a P versus NP problem. And I love talking about P versus NP problems, and I'm absolutely willing to get into that if you want to. But like, it's just you can't fully understand the beginning of. Well, now I'm just explaining P versus NP. I'm not going to do that. But yeah, like it's just if you can't understand the front line of something, then you're just going to have to do the best you can from the back line and make yourself feel as secure as possible, because that's why we pursue knowledge. It's because we want to feel more secure in the world around us. And in a lot of ways, the brain deals in securities. It tries to become rich. It tries to have a loving wife or a husband or whatever you swing, and just tries to feel more secure, because through feeling secure, you have less anxiety and you have less societal pressures on you. You have less. Here, let me tie this all together. You have less pressures on your epigenome, and you don't have to worry about mental illness so much. So, I mean, that's a big problem for me, is the P versus MP problem in that regard. And just, I don't feel like I understand free will in any sense right now, so I choose not to believe in it. And yeah.
No, that makes sense. I agree. I mean, I obviously, for me also, I mean, I always tend to stray away from things that I don't understand. It's always just the most peaceful and just the most appeasing when you're able to completely understand what you believe in. And I obviously have no argument with you believing that. That's completely fine. But just to relate something, just I guess to shift the topic maybe just a little bit. But since we usually do we do anime openings with our theme song when we do an NBA podcast.
Yes.
So, are you familiar with Naruto?
I am, and I'm actually the weirdo in anime where well, not even the weirdo. What's the word for it? I'm the I'm not trying to think of a Japanese word. I wish I had a Japanese word for it. That'd be super cool if we're talking about anime. I just throw out a bunch of Japanese terms, but no, I'm a bit of a let's say hipster in that regard. That I don't watch any of like the classically good animes. I watch like a bunch of random ones that nobody's ever heard of. And they're like, so Ryan, you watch One Punch Man or I don't know, Full Metal Alchemist? I'm like, no. Or yeah. What about Avatar? No. Oh yeah, just watch this one you've never heard of. And I'm like, is it good? Yeah, it's still good. It's yeah.
My brother's actually a much bigger fan of it than I am, but the two that I've watched is I'm basically exactly the opposite of you. So when I was younger, when I was little, the first one I ever got into was obviously Dragon Ball Z. I think that's probably the most famous overall one. But Naruto, it's interesting because this actually goes along perfectly with our discussion of free will. So in the second half of Naruto, there's a villain, and basically what his goal is his goal is to achieve peace, but his method for achieving peace is that basically he wants to project an illusion off the moon to where he would basically trap everybody inside of an ideal world that he has created where everybody can have their own version of paradise. And that is his goal, to basically trap everyone in an illusion. But the problem with it is that exactly what you and I have just been discussing is that all the good guys and the supposed heroes in the anime in Naruto, their issue with him is that they feel as if he's just going to trap everyone in an illusion where they are achieving peace. It is peace, but they think that version of peace is a lie because there's no free will and there's no such thing as being able to make a decision. So my brother and I were actually having a discussion about this, and I was like, my brother was basically saying like he did nothing wrong, because I mean, who cares how you achieve peace as long as you achieve peace? And like, if he's putting everybody in their own version of paradise, then why should they complain about not being able to make decisions because they're in their ideal world and they're having everything they want? And that was just something that I thought was really cool to think about because, like, I mean, does it really matter if you're going to be living in a perfect version of paradise? Does it really matter if you're able to make your own decisions? If it's all really just if it's a lie? But I mean, it's not like you would be consciously thinking about all the time that it's a lie. You would be thinking about the fact that, or not even a lie necessarily. It's not like you would be thinking about the fact that it's an illusion. You would just be thinking about like, oh wow, like I'm in paradise. Like I literally have everything I want. So that's it's pretty cool that I was just able to connect it to. So it's interesting. I'd be interested to see what you think about that. Like what you think about like if there was an illusion to have exactly what you wanted, would you accept that, or would you disagree and feel like you have to create it in like a regular world? You can't just have an ideal world that's not really real, even though you would think it's real.
Well, here I'll counter this with a question of my own. It's a philosophical question that I see a lot of people see mentioned a bunch, and I always think it's a stupid one because I've never seen anyone go on the other side of it. But essentially, the question is, would you be okay living in a situation or a world where you succeed, where you're having a great life and everything, but you're having a great life because somewhere along the road someone lied to you and someone put you in that position because of a lie, and based on that, you succeeded? Would you be willing to accept the fact that you had a great life as a result? Or would you feel cheated? Would you feel like, oh, I wasted everything based on this one lie and I'm a failure? And that this one lie, or even let's say a series of lies, just invalidates everything that you did?
I don't know. I might come off as wrong for wanting to for saying no, but I actually would be fine with that.
No, and that's exactly what most people would say, actually.
Yeah, and I mean, as long as it didn't affect anything that happened. I mean, like obviously, if it was something like, I mean, like if it was something like criminal or like, something horrible where like I wasn't supposed to, have something, or if I was cheating, if someone else was, like, let's say, like if I was, if I actually failed like my MCAT or something, but my like the person who scored it gave me a perfect score on it, like that would be horrible because that would just make my career horrible because I would have no idea what I'm doing, and that would probably lead to some, some bad practicing as a doctor and all that. But if it didn't affect what I was doing on a day to day basis, then I actually wouldn't have an issue with it.
Yeah, and like I think that a lot of people that do go along that side, they take it to an extreme and they say, oh well, if I was if I didn't cheat, would I have still made it to that point? And well, I'll counter this with another example. Like I think most of the time, what the philosophical concept is supposed to say is that using your MCAT example, let's say you were going to fall 2 points short of passing and getting into medical school, but someone fudged the results. Would you feel like it was a big problem?
Oh no, not at
Yeah,
all.
no, most people wouldn't have a problem with that. But you didn't earn it. And I'm absolutely on the side of the lie is fine as well. But I'm just saying it's interesting that a lot of people put so much priority on not having that kind of thing happen to them, and then they're perfectly fine with it at the borders because oh, it doesn't really matter if it's close. And so they don't actually have a problem with the principle; they have a problem with the degree of cheating. And
Mhm.
I mean that's how I feel about that. But yeah, so obviously the whole illusion thing, yeah, I have absolutely no problem with that. Same thing with the whole argument about do we live in a computer simulation, which, first off, I think is absolute BS. We don't, because there's no, because going back to Occam's razor, that's a more complicated, I mean, that's just a more complicated version of the universe. There's no reason to believe that when we have a more simple one that makes more sense and that requires fewer logical assumptions. So I mean, yeah, but no, if you could create an illusion that creates peace and just projects everyone's own happiness and whatever, and they don't even know, I mean, yeah, that would be great. And that also gets into my idea of like the whole government run by the philosopher king, which I can't believe I just said my idea. The the Greek ideal, yeah, that is not my idea, but no, like just the idea that one person has to take the brunt of the horror of politics upon themselves and do the right thing in that and take the fall for everyone else, be the martyr. And through that, everyone else succeeds. And that also gets into the idea of the trolley problem, where you sacrifice one person for the good of the rest of them. And yeah, I feel like if you had to be the supervillain that knew that everything was an illusion, and I'm not even seeing how this guy's a supervillain, first off. Like, he sounds like a pretty cool guy. But yeah, like, just if you had to be the one person to know that the entire world was a lie, well, first off, you commit suicide, so you don't have to live with yourself. But yeah, like just you're the greatest person ever if you cure peace based on that action. And that also gets into an argument that I really don't like is when supervillains, you agree with them completely, but then the hero comes in and you're like, wait, why are you beating up the supervillain? He's completely right in this. And like this also being topical, I'm going to bring up being first Incredibles movie since the second Incredibles movie came out a week ago or so. Syndrome, I feel like, has one of the best arguments as, if not a Disney villain, then a movie in general animated culture. He has one of the best premises out there. So what is Syndrome doing? So he's living in a world where there are a bunch of superheroes. And why are they super? Because they have a bunch of genetic defects and whatnot, and just stuff they were born with, and they get to be super because of that. And the rest of the people, well, sucks to be you. You're at the mercy of the superheroes. So what does Syndrome want to do? Syndrome, the way the movie portrays it, he wants to take the superheroes down a peg, but really what he wants to do is he wants to raise the rest of society up. He wants to use technology to give the rest of society superpowers. And he has a great line in that movie, and it goes, if everyone's super, then no one will be. And that also gets into the idea of everything in context. But what's so bad about everyone being super? Unless you're on the side of the superheroes who want to hoard it to themselves, and they want to get all the pride and glory. And, I mean, it just sucks that they went against Syndrome, honestly. I don't know what Disney was thinking giving a supervillain that good of a premise, because then it just makes you be like, wait, hang on, Incredibles, why are you fighting this guy? I mean, we know why you're fighting this guy, but why is society fighting this guy? And
yeah, see, I see in general, like, I oftentimes, like, basically in everything I watch, I really have a hard time going against most villains. Like, obviously, like, sometimes, like, you'll be watching something and, like, the villain will be someone horrible who, like, either kills people or, like, hurts people or is, like, mean to kids or something like that. Or, like, that's an easy villain to hate. Like, but, like, oftentimes when I find, like, a super villain has, like, a goal or, like, they have, like, like, a reason for what they're doing, I oftentimes end up not having that much of an issue with it. Like, I remember, like, for the original Spider-Man movies, like with Tobey Maguire and stuff, like Sandman. I don't think there was anybody who actually disliked Sandman once they found out the motives for why he was doing what he was doing.
yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I mean, Sandman was a great example of that. I mean, he had his didn't he lose his daughter or something? I didn't actually see this.
Or his daughter had cancer, I believe, and he was basically a criminal stealing. He was poor and he couldn't afford treatment for her, so he was stealing money for her, and that's why he went to jail.
Oh, that's right. And wasn't there a whole thing around him having killed Peter's father or something?
He killed he was partially responsible for the murder of Uncle Ben.
Okay.
And then but he actually didn't do it. He was there. Then so basically, like, he was helping the person who shot Uncle Ben, and they needed a car. And the reason they needed a car was because they were robbing a bank, and they were robbing a bank because Sandman needed money for his daughter who was sick. And just when the partner that he was robbing the bank with ended up shooting Uncle Ben. So, I mean, obviously, if he himself had shot Uncle Ben, then that kind of makes it that's kind of, then everyone would be like, okay, yeah, like, screw him. Uncle Ben's like a defenseless old man. Like, why did you shoot him? But, like, when the way that they did it was like, he actually didn't kill Uncle Ben himself. His partner did. He was just there, and he got there like a second late, and that's why he shot him for the car, and then they needed the car. But in terms of what he was actually doing, which was robbing the bank, nobody had any issue with him robbing the bank, and nobody really cared that much about him doing that because they were like, his daughter's like 6 years old, 7 years old, she has cancer or something. He's trying to fund her, medical treatments and stuff. And he's completely broke. Like, obviously, he needed to do something. That was his only choice. And then, obviously, when he had the superpower, he started exploiting that to, make it easier for him to do the things that he needed to do for his daughter. But yeah.
Yeah, and I've definitely been more sympathetic to villain causes than most people. But yeah, most of the time they are pretty reasonable, and they're just playing on. It's just like the villain, they fell into, if not hard times, they fell into a situation where they didn't really have much of a choice. And I would even use that shooting Uncle Ben example, where The guy doesn't know who Uncle Ben is. All he knows is there's this random person who looks like he's going to stop him, and he's got to react in the moment, or something might happen. Who knows? Uncle Ben might be an undercover cop and pull out a gun on him. He's got to react immediately. And sure, he made the wrong decision in that case, but how many people would have made the correct decision in a situation where you're robbing a bank and like some guy comes up and he looks like he's going to do something. I mean, obviously the movie's going to frame it as Uncle Ben's some defenseless old man. He's holding his hands up. He's like, "Don't shoot!" And like he's just
And
got his.
actually, it was a good moment. I'm not. Do you remember Spider-Man 3?
I didn't see any of the movies.
Oh, really? So
Yeah.
basically, what happens is, Sandman just robbed the bank, right? He knocks on Uncle Ben's window, and he's like, I don't want to hurt you, old man. Like, I need the car. And Uncle Ben is like, he said no. I really, if I would have said yes. Like,
Yeah, no, you should say yes.
yeah, you should have just said yes and given him the car. It would have been fine. And he said no. And he said he was talking to Sandman, trying to, I guess, talk him out of crime because Uncle Ben is supposed to be seen as some wise old man who's like guiding people away from wrong and all that. But he was like, put the gun down and go home, son. And like obviously Sandman is like, Uncle, like, get out of the car, dude. Like, I just need the car. And they were just talking about this, right? And Sandman wasn't hurting him, and Uncle Ben wasn't like resisting. Like they were having a conversation. Like it was like he was saying, "Put the gun down, go home," and Sandman was like, "No, like I can't. I'm sorry. I got to do this for my daughter. I need the car. Get out." And then Sandman's partner comes up, and Sandman asks him again. He's like, "Dude, like we really need the car." And then the other guy just shoots Uncle Ben, and Sandman's like, "Dude, what the hell?" I was talking to him, and then he was like, "He wasn't giving you the car. We gotta go." And then Sandman was like, "Well, damn, now he's dead, so we have the car." And then they took the car. That happened.
Yeah, and I mean, you just get forced into a certain situation there, and that's also why I want to learn martial arts, is so that I can subdue someone if I have to without killing them. Like everyone's like, "Oh, I got my gun, and if you rob my house, I can shoot you up, and don't come robbing my house." But I mean, you could just put him in a chokehold and put him out, and then call the police, and the situation is dealt with just as well.
Exactly, and then you don't have to do all that. Then you don't. I mean, it's a whole other discussion as well. But I mean, I feel like there's just a problem with just shooting someone on sight because,
Oh
like,
yeah,
then you have to, plead self-defense, and then like, what if it's like you can't really prove that it was self-defense, and then it just becomes a mess because then it's like, what if they were just coming into the building because they thought it was somewhere else? Because I think there was an instance of that that happened to an NBA player, I think actually.
was it
He was
Gilbert Arenas?
no, he was a player on the New Orleans Pelicans when they, it was one of the years where like everyone in the world was injured, so they had like a bunch of rotation players and stuff. And it was some random player that they had. I think he didn't have a key to his apartment, so he was breaking into an apartment, and he thought he was breaking into his own apartment, but he actually broke into someone else's apartment on accident. And then when he accidentally broke into the other person's apartment, the person who was living in the apartment shot him because they thought he was robbing them. And then obviously that became a mess because then it was like, oh my God, like you shot an innocent guy, like what the hell? But then it was like what the hell was I supposed to do? He broke into my home. So and it creates an issue. Like so death I just don't think is really a solution to all that much.
Yeah, I mean, first off, you gotta make sure it's your apartment if you're gonna break into it. I'm not saying he should have gotten shot. That's a horrible situation, but not that you set yourself up for it, but yeah, that
It's just dumb. Like it could have been prevented very easily if you had just focused and paid attention.
you're just like I don't know, gotten a hotel for the night or something, or called like a locksmith. I'm sure they have like 24/7 locksmiths, but
They do actually. I needed to use one the day before graduation.
no, okay, so you call the 24/7 locksmith and just hide out in your car for a couple hours. But
Yes.
I know a lot of people. They like to just be like, "Oh, I'm gonna be super cool about this and crawl through my window." Or I know everyone does that, or at least everyone in the movies does that. But yeah, I mean, when you take risks, you set yourself up for failure, and like it gets back to what we were talking about, where you gotta think in terms of what's going to result in the least possible damage to yourself, and taking a risk like breaking into a house, even if you think it's your house. Are you 100% sure it's your house? And
Serious.
yeah,
Gosh.
but no. Crap, I forgot what we were talking about.
Sandman and death.
Ah, that's right, Sandman. Yeah, no, the villains are almost always have a reasonable cause, and the superheroes are boring because they don't have a reasonable cause. They just want to do justice. And how many people out there really just want to do good in the world? And sure, there are some people that claim they want to do it, but then there's the whole thing around egoistic altruism and just you're doing good because it makes you feel good to do good. Does that mean you have an ego complex in that sense, and that all you care about is fulfilling your desire to do good? And yeah, I mean, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I really hate some superheroes. Like I really I can't stand Captain America. I can't stand Superman. Um, I can't stand any of those people who are just like, oh, I'm doing this for the greater good. It's dumb. Like, I have a much stronger preference for somebody like Batman, who's like, his parents were murdered in front of him, so obviously he had a passion for wanting to stop crime because of something that he'd experienced. Like, there was actually something to that. Um, I like the Hulk, but I mean, if you really think about it, it's dumb. Like, he was a scientist who accidentally got like chemicals for something, and all of a sudden he can do this. Like the origin for all these superheroes is really stupid, except for Batman and like, you know, Robin
and
and a couple of
and
others.
Batgirl and
Yeah, the Joker's a great villain.
oh,
Um,
Joker's the best villain. Yeah,
yeah, by far. And Batman obviously has issues. Given the fact that he won't ever kill Joker, which is dumb. But you know, a lot of heroes suck, and Batman's probably the best one just in terms of his reasoning for wanting. Because like everyone else just has some dumb thing that's like, oh, I'm Flash. I had something chemicals spilled on me, so now I can run super fast. Like there's no reason for that. Like he could literally become like the greatest track star in the world, but for some reason he has this wants to fight justice or something. It really doesn't make much sense.
yeah, and I really want to see a superhero that their main desire is just they are a glory hog and they just want to be loved by everyone. And like they keep saying that, and like they defeat crime, and they're like, sweet, that's gonna get me some more Instagram followers, or like, yes, I made the front page news. That was totally worth risking my life for. And I think they kind of did that with Deadpool, but they didn't really dive headfirst into it. They just more so made Deadpool kind of a clown. But yeah, if you could just have a superhero like all he cares about is just being a cool guy and being like, "Hey, look at me, I'm awesome. I saved the world." Yeah, that's pretty cool. And just be like that. That'd be really nice to see.
It would be.
But yeah, a lot of those superheroes are pretty stupid. But Batman's just awesome because it's like, hey, you could do this too if you had billions of dollars. Like anyone could do that if they had basically unlimited amount of money. It's just
And
yeah, and power, yeah. But yeah, I'm trying to figure out where I was going to transition. That's right. So, have you seen the new Avengers movie?
I have not.
Okay, I haven't either. Are you comfortable with a spoiler about Thanos?
Yeah, I don't really mind. By the time I watch it, I've already heard a lot of stuff about it. I've seen some memes and stuff, so I don't really mind.
Okay, cool. So essentially, the Thanos thing, and I'm pretty sure you're going to go along with this, and it's going to be a boring question, but essentially, the big question that Thanos proposes in the movie, and not really proposes in the movie, he just goes for it and does it anyways, regardless of what anyone has to say about it. But the big thing that Thanos does in the movie is he gets a ton of power and gets whatever the power ring. I don't really know. I didn't see the movie, either. But he just gets enough power to wipe out half of the world's population. And he makes the argument that by killing half of the world's population, he is making life better for everyone else in the world by doing that. So in that sense, creating a giant trolley problem where should you kill half of the world's population if it makes life perfect for everyone else in the world? And I can send you a link to a Wisecrack video where they dissect all of the philosophy and economic theory behind why wiping out half of the world's population would be good for the world, even if it's highly immoral, and like the whole population growth charts and how it would level off at a rate that's much lower than 10 billion, which isn't really sustainable for the world. Instead, it'd be something like 6 billion or something, and how like it would just set up an amazing life for everyone else at the expense of half of the world population. And I suppose what I'm asking is, would you have a problem with something like that happening? Like, obviously, you would have a problem with it. You'd want a coin flip on if you're going to live or die. But would you be able to live with the fact that you were one of the survivors if it made your life better and if it was a reasonable cause in that sense? I mean, as reasonable as killing half the world's population can be.
Well, from a morality standpoint, I would have an issue with the fact that half the world's population was eliminated because obviously you'd have a ton of good people eliminated. You'd have a lot of young children eliminated. You have a lot of nice elderly people eliminated. Who I love elderly people, but yeah, I mean, if if I was one of the survivors, I really wouldn't. I probably wouldn't carry around survivor's guilt. Like I said earlier, I'm really kind of a carefree individual. I kind of just take whatever's happening, and I don't really stress over things that I wasn't able to control. And if I was one of the survivors, I feel like eventually I would be shocked, obviously, because half the world would be gone, and obviously I would be very upset if someone that I cared about or one of my family members was eliminated and the half the world's whatever. But if it really didn't affect my friends and my family, and if it was something that was really distant from me, then I feel like I would be okay with it because, I mean, the reality of the situation is, even though it's horrible, the fact is there are so many, things that are going wrong in the world right now with, politics, like avoiding and all that stuff. We've been avoiding talking about that, but like there's a lot of bad things going on in the world anyway. But even though it's horrible, and even though it's we acknowledge that they're happening, we don't really get affected by them, and as a result of that, it's just kind of easy to turn a blind eye to it. Which, like, I'm acknowledging that that's wrong, and that's not the way to do it. But if it were to happen and half the world was just suddenly eliminated, and and it made life better for me and my family, then um, I would. I can't lie. I can't sit here and lie and say that I would just say, oh no, like it's wrong because it's immoral. Because the fact of the matter is, ultimately, everybody to some degree is innately selfish, in my opinion. And when things go better for you as an individual, I just feel like it's much easier to live under circumstances where life is getting better for you, even if that is at the expense of others.
Yeah, and
Sad, but it's the truth, in my opinion.
no, absolutely, and you'll have to check out that video, definitely, if you think like that, because it basically just goes through all of the reasoning why it would make the lives of everyone better, and even if it is highly immoral, and obviously never going to happen, because that would just be terrible. But yeah, it is very interesting to look at it economically and politically and sociologically, and just look at the factors for why it makes sense. And I don't know, it just gives you a greater appreciation for a supervillain, which I'm always open to. So yeah. But how do you feel about movies? Because I don't know if you know this about me, but I have very strong opinions on movies.
I actually don't watch very many. I really can't say that I think too highly of any specific movies. I've definitely seen more bad movies than I've seen good movies, and I'm also just not into the whole going out to see them and sitting down for a while, because I feel like if I'm going to go out somewhere with people, then I feel like I always prefer to do something where I'm actually interacting with them instead of just going out somewhere to sit in front of a screen when I could just take someone somewhere and sit in a screen at my house. But I enjoy my favorite. I love horror movies. Are my favorite type of movie. I always like a good scare, and when I have people over and when I'm just with friends and it's late at night and something, and we're just kind of bored and want something to watch, before we sleep and something, then that's really the only time that I really watch movies. But for the most part, I'm not really too into the movie scene. I don't criticize them too much. Um, Obviously, it's not like I enjoy watching bad movies, but sometimes when there's a bad ending, I kind of laugh it off. I don't really think of it too much, but I always appreciate watching good movies. I've seen a couple good movies. I like a good comedy. I like a good scare. So yeah.
Okay, so how do you feel about movies as a vector of media? How do you feel about their length in its ability to tell a narrative?
What do you mean? How do I feel about their ability to
Well, do you think they can do it effectively?
I feel like it really depends on the genre of the movie. If you're gonna do something like if you're doing something that's about something more legitimate that like a specific crowd can relate to, then I definitely feel like you can. Have you heard of the movie The Big Short?
I haven't.
So The Big Short is my uncle took me and my brother to see this, and I fell asleep. I was just dead tired that day. But apparently, it was about the economy and like
Oh, I have heard about this actually. Yeah, no, it was just diagramming all the ways that the 2008 financial crisis happened and like the fallout. And
yeah, and my brother and my uncle watched it, and they really enjoyed it, and they said that it was really cool to have to learn about the economics. I fell asleep, so I really had no idea what they were talking about. But
yeah,
when we left and they were talking about it, they really seemed to enjoy it. So I feel like in a case like that, that's the movies like that can actually be really cool because there's something that can teach people a lot, and like it's something people can relate to because obviously the adults who are working right now obviously experience they experienced that just a decade ago. So in instances like those, I think it can be really cool when you have
Okay.
movies like such as that. But then obviously
So
you have
documentaries check.
yeah. But as far as like I mean, like sometimes you just have really stupid movies that are just kind of like, why did I waste 2.5 hours of my life to go see that?
Yeah. So my big belief is that you can do it for documentaries, but for almost any character-driven narrative or world narrative or whatnot, you can't tell an effective narrative in 2.5 hours. By that, I mean you can't fully flesh out an idea or a character or a circumstance or a world in 2.5 hours. You just don't have enough time. And I feel fairly strongly about that, that you just can't do it. And I think that's justified in a lot of ways by the sequelization of movies currently. And yeah, you can say that that has a lot to do with money, but I think it also has a lot to do with the fact that people want more out of the movie series that they see because they don't feel like they're getting enough initially. If they felt like, okay, I feel satisfied after this, they wouldn't feel such a pull to watch another movie, would you? No, you would just be like, okay, I feel like I was fairly satisfied based on that. So, like an example I would give of how to do a movie correctly. So, this revolves around the concept of having a very small narrative that you're trying to tell. Maybe telling a small theme through a series of characters and not actually trying to tell a story about characters would be The Incredibles. And this is why I was among my friend groups super disappointed to see Incredibles 2 because I felt like they did a fantastic job originally. But I feel like for The Incredibles, the big thing that they're trying to convey is a sense of family. And they're trying to show a story of a family and how they struggle and how they persevere and how they eventually succeed and how they grow stronger through their experiences. And if you look at it through that lens, The Incredibles is very successful. It tells that narrative through a story, a couple stories even. It tells it through a timeline of a good decade, really, excluding jump cuts, and it seems to work fairly well. But if you want to make the argument that The Incredibles is designed to tell the story of The Incredibles, it doesn't do an effective job. It doesn't tell the story of The Incredibles completely. We miss out on a ton of stuff. We don't know about Bob's upbringing at all. We don't know about his wife's upbringing. I forget her name off the top of my head. We don't know about what Dash and Violet were as kids. We don't know how they're gonna result in as adults. We don't know anything about Jack, and like you just don't have a good idea of the entire story. And you can say, yeah, but do you need all of that? Well, you do if you're trying to tell a story about that. And the fact that movies are branded as The Incredibles and not branded as A Sense of Family, it just says that they're not, if not misbranded, they are aware of the fact that you can't tell the entire narrative in that time and that you just need more time to do it. And yeah, I mean, you can argue that like every movie passes that basically my test if you shrink its lens enough, but is the movie shrinking its lens to that? And I feel like that's the test that you have to put a lot of movies through, and I feel like most movies fail that, and that's why you see so many movie series today.
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying. It's it's an interesting thing. I agree with I agree with
Okay, well then.
you.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, there's not, I don't have
No,
much
no,
to.
I get that. Okay. Well, I did put a pin in the aliens earlier. I guess we can come back to that. Okay, so how do you feel about aliens? You think they exist? You think they
Well,
visited Earth?
I think that I think outer space and the universe and the concept that we have about galaxies and different planets and all that other stuff and other solar systems and everything. I just feel like the universe is just way too big for there not to be some other form of life out there. So I do believe in aliens. However, I don't think that they come to Earth. I don't think that they're too concerned with us. I think that they probably think the same things about us as we think about them. And when they see something suspicious in their area, they probably think, "Oh my God, it's an alien spaceship. It's a human UFO. It's this. It's that." And, to them, they probably have their own thing going on, and to them, we're aliens, and to us, they're aliens. So I definitely do think that there's other life out there other than just us. I'm not sure how close it is. I'm not sure which galaxy it's in. I'm not sure if it's in our same solar system. I'm not sure how big they are. Not sure what color they are. None of that. But I am definitely a believer in the fact that there is other life out there other than life on just Earth, because I have a way too difficult of a time believing that we just so happen to be so lucky as to be the only planet in the solar system where there's life. It
Yep.
just doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah, I've essentially the same belief. Yeah, the Fermi paradox states if there were so many, if the universe is so big, then how on earth can there not be aliens out there? And really, it deals more with why haven't they contacted us and how they might be living within us. But I'm not going to dive into that because that's really a silly argument. But yeah, I mean, this goes back to the whole idea of if it can happen once, it can happen any number of times. And the fact that we come up so late on, well, not so late, but that we come up fairly late on the not biological spectrum, but just the universe's timeline. It would be almost impossible to believe that life wouldn't have originated at some other point in the universe and wouldn't be around now. My biggest thing is just that the speed of light constant is unbreakable. So that makes it, if not completely unreasonable, to go visit another life form or species or life bearing planet, then, I mean, it just doesn't make sense to do it. And sure, you can make the argument that wormholes or bending the space time are becoming more and more likely, and that it may be a concept that makes sense, but every proposal that I've seen of that kind of thing always regards it as an unstable thing. So, would you be willing to just embark on something like that if it is horrendously unstable and there's like a 1 in 10,000 chance of actually holding up through transferring mass? I don't think so. So, more than likely than not, the speed of light constant is unbreakable. So, even if there are aliens out there, the chance that we would have had them visit us is so low that like it just doesn't make any sense. I mean, just think about it for us. Why would we? I mean, let's say we knew that aliens lived out there and they lived, I don't know, let's say, I don't know, 50 light years away. So would we go visit them? No. Why? Because it would take us like 5,000 years to actually get there, and there's no way we could sustain human life to that point. And even if we could, why would we? The amount of fuel that it would take to even approach the speed of light is absurd. I mean, if you just look at the E equals mc squared, or the bigger formula that I always forget, the formula for, dang, I don't even know the name of it. Basically, the expanded formula for momentum and mass and light. It basically sets up a situation where as you increase the velocity, the problem is the velocity is in the denominator. So, wait, that's not the problem. What is the problem again? I don't really remember how this comes about, but if you just look at the formula, you can see that as velocity increases, or as velocity increases, it trends towards the denominator reaching zero eventually. So once that denominator reaches zero, obviously the equation breaks. So you can't actually make it to the speed of light. So obviously that creates a problem there. So you're never actually going to be even getting there in 50 light years. You're going to be getting there in like 500, 5,000 light years, if even that, because if you remember, you got to accelerate to actually stay at the speed of light. You can't just stay at the same velocity. You'll slow down. So, I mean, it's just not a realistic thing. So I don't see why or how aliens could even visit us and why they would even want to in the first place. It just doesn't make sense thoroughly. And also among that, I'm going to transition this to discussion I always have with people because I'm fascinated with this, is I'm a big believer in circular evolution, and if not certain, that's a horrible term for this. Circular life, where the evolution doesn't work in a linear path; it works in a cycle. So most people have the belief that evolution functions as a timeline. And you see this all the time in science class. You saw this year, where we did a timeline of evolution, where basically what happens is you start off with, I don't know, some eukaryotic, well, you start off with a prokaryotic cell that goes to a eukaryotic cell, you get some multicellular life out of that, that eventually transitions into, I don't know, some algae or something. Then from there, you can start populating the atmosphere with oxygen, at least in a carbon-based life form. And that's a very important word because you might have silicon-based life forms, you might have galenium-based life forms, whatnot. But you have that, and eventually you get some larger organisms living in the oceans, and then from there they eventually walk onto land. They need the extra space. Eventually you get amphibians. Those transition into reptiles eventually through species differentiation or radiation of species. Then you eventually get humans out of that through through many trials and errors. And after that, does it end? No, it doesn't end. That doesn't make any sense. Why would evolution stop? So my big theory behind this, and this is actually my theory, I came up with this. I can claim this as the Ryan Moret theory for evolution. So when you look at a timeline, when you look at a circle, if you zoom in far enough, it will look like a line because you can't see the full circle. So my big thing is I think that humans exist to exhaust themselves, to eventually kill themselves off, to die off, so that there's nothing left in the world, that they've exhausted everything and through that extent exhausted themselves, and eventually they're gone, and the world is left with nothing but to start over. And if not start over, then the world is done and evolution starts over somewhere else. So that's the cycle. I'm a big believer in that, and that humans aren't like the end point, they're just a point in the system, and that we're just executing our evolutionary niche, and we haven't overcome evolution, we are just acting within it still, and that we're fulfilling our role to eventually just get rid of ourselves, basically. And that's a very dark outlook, obviously, but I think it's one that makes a lot of sense in the context of evolution, because it seemed a little silly if evolution screwed up by creating a sentient species, because it only makes sense to have a sentient species. Would it really not have taken that into account?
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense as well because I don't I don't really buy into the fact that like I don't really believe anything lasts forever, and I just don't really. I also don't think that I've never even heard that before, a circular evolution. But when you bring it up, that actually does. It sounds like actually a pretty good theory. Maybe you should put that out there somewhere,
Yeah,
right?
I know. I need to write a blog or something.
Yeah, or maybe talk to Ms. Johnson about it. It'd be interesting to see what she thinks. But or I think it'll probably come to an end one day because I think Earth, especially given how it's treated now with how poorly the environment is being taken care of and everything, I really don't think the Earth is going to be able to sustain life forever either. And who knows? Obviously, there are all those theories about the sun crashing into us and all that. But if the world ends, I do definitely think there's other life, and life will probably start somewhere else. And eventually, I feel like everything comes to an end, and I feel like it could definitely be the same way as far as life goes, and it could probably start over. And I know you said it's a dark theory, but I don't really think it's that dark. I feel like that's sort of just the way that it might be, and it might just have to be, to get at some point you do sort of exhaust everything, and there's really nothing in this world that lasts forever. And yeah, I would actually completely buy into that theory that once human life is done, it can definitely start over. And obviously that gets controversial when you bring in religion and all that stuff. But excluding that, I've always as difficult as it is with theories about like creation and all that stuff, I've always tried to keep science separate from religion. And as
Yeah,
far as science goes, I actually could completely buy into the theory that everything just kind of starts over, regardless of whether or not that's here on Earth. Because I don't know, I've never once, like ever since grade school, I've never believed that Earth is for some reason the only blessed planet that can sustain life. I just don't think that that's true at all. And hopefully there is definitely another species out there that's doing things better than we are, because I sort of hate this idea that humans just kind of think that we're all on top just because we have certain things that other creatures and other species don't have. I just think that that's stupid, and I just think that we're fortunate, and I don't really think that humans are some super superior thing. And I feel like if we saw another alien species or something, we would try to look down upon it. And the fact that we're basically trying to go over and make Mars ours and be like, oh, we discovered water on Mars, we have rovers on Mars is going to be ours. Obviously that's good for purposes in terms of finding something, but the fact that there are already theories about like, oh, it's cool if Earth ends, we're just going to go take over Mars, like I don't know. I really don't like that at all. I don't like the idea of just being able to go take something just because we feel like it or just because we feel like we deserve to keep going and all that stuff. I'm not a big fan of that. So I would actually not be opposed to life restarting at all once all humans die and things just kind of start over. And then obviously it'd be really interesting to see how history would get with that because, then it'd be like their history would exclude our history. And that kind of makes it really cool how like there'd be a history for them that they don't even know about. Nobody would know about what happened. No one would even. I mean, for all we know, there was probably maybe there was, like maybe there was a history before our history, and maybe there was another. Maybe we're like the second evolutionary cycle, or the third, or the fourth, or the fifth, or something. Like
And maybe they created the pyramids.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, who knows? Because really, who knows? Yeah, that's really cool. It's just one of those things just to think about it. It's one of those cool concepts of like, wow, like there's probably a lot more in this entire life thing than just the fact that Adam and Eve and all that stuff and Homo sapiens becoming from evolving from monkeys and all that stuff. Like for all we know, there was probably maybe the last time the evolutionary cycle happened, maybe there were like only 1 billion people on the Earth or 2 billion or something. And who knows? We really just don't know at all. I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, and on the subject of everything coming to an end, I know the second law of thermodynamics would certainly agree with you there on entropy bringing an end to everything. But yeah, I just think it's a dark theory in terms of the people that would say, well, that's terrible if we're doing it to ourselves, or what are we doing here? We're just ruining the world, and how am I supposed to live with that? I got to do something. But I think you and me have very much have the belief of it is what it is, and no action done by anyone could stop what is not preordained, but that is in our nature. And we are our nature, and we only act through it, and there's nothing more we can do.
Definitely.
Okay, well, that's that. Okay, so let's see, where did I want to go with that? No, I guess that's all I wanted to go with on that part. Okay, we touched aliens, we kind of touched dreams there. Okay, well, I'm actually super surprised. We haven't even, we're 2.5 hours in, and we haven't even pulled out any of my questions I had written up. That's pretty awesome. Okay, this is interesting. What's your smartphone philosophy? So, like, how do you organize your smartphone? How do you use it? When should you use it? And just what is your whole philosophy around it?
Well, I guess I should start with this. One of the greatest debates of our time, Android versus iPhone. So I actually I have an iPhone, but I will never once believe that iPhones are in any way superior to Android phones, and I'll explain why. A lot of people who make fun of Android phones, or they make fun of the quality of the Snapchat that they send and all that stuff, and the camera quality and all that stuff. To me, it's just a little bit ignorant because those people have never once actually utilized an Android phone to its full potential. They don't know all the things that it's capable of. Android phones are so much more customizable than iPhones are. You can put all sorts of different launchers on it. You can play with the speaker settings. You can increase the bass of the song or the treble of the song straight from the phone itself. You can make it completely unique. You can have widgets on the screen that interact with you. You can have just a lot more going on and a lot more creativity and really personalize an Android phone much more to your liking than you can with an iPhone because, I mean, let's face it, regardless of what wallpaper you put on an iPhone, at the end of the day, you're excited about it for like the first 2-3 days that you get it, and then after that, it's just like every other iPhone you had before, and then you just rearrange your apps in whatever order you like, put them in folders, and that's that. With an Android phone, you really don't have that experience at all. I've actually been really into smartphones. It was actually one of the first things that I was passionate about when I was younger. When I was around 10 or 11, like back when I still had like the sliding phones that everyone had, I was really into smartphones, and I was like. That was one of the main things that I wanted. And I remember how excited I was when I finally got my first one. It was a Galaxy Nexus in 2012, and ever since then, I was a huge pusher of the whole Android phone thing back then. And then it just kind of eventually. Well, I guess before I explain why I now have an iPhone, if I'm pushing so heavily for Android, I guess I should just explain why. I mean, just all the different things that I was able to do with it, and how you can actually find ways to download free music on an Android phone, where you can actually get stuff from like the YouTube to MP3 converter online and then download it straight to your phone instead of on Apple phones. You have to either buy Apple Music or pay for a Spotify subscription or something, or you have to YouTube all your music or something like that. you can actually do actual things on an Android phone that where you're not subject to some sort of limitation. So that was always something that I loved about Android phones, and ever since my first smart Galaxy Nexus that I had in 2012, I've sort of bounced around. Like I had a Galaxy Nexus, and then I had like an iPhone 4 for a little while, and then I had a Samsung Galaxy Note 4 Edge in there somewhere, and I had a Samsung Galaxy Note 5 in there, and then I had an iPhone 6S and an iPhone 7 Plus, and now I have the iPhone 10. But basically, my reason for having an iPhone now actually really doesn't have all that much to do with me preferring the iPhone anymore. Or any more than I do Android phones. Really, the only reason that I have the iPhone now is because it's just more simpler now that everybody else has an iPhone, and everybody uses FaceTime and everybody uses iMessage for their group chats, and it really just makes it simpler to not have to explain to people why you have an Android phone and why you have to explain why you have the green text messages and stuff. So all that stuff. So my brother has been pushing me to switch back to Android because he knows how heavy a fighter I was for Team Android for a long time. But Androids are better than iPhones and anyone who disputes that just doesn't really know all the capabilities of Android devices. And I highly recommend they try one so they avoid ignorantly living their life to think that iPhones are just superior, like a master race of some sort, because that's just dumb. But anyways, as far as how I organize my iPhone, I was really bored one day of just the whole setup. So what I actually do is I keep all of my applications in alphabetical order. So I have on my lock screen, I have like App Store, then Calculator, Calendar, Camera, Classroom, as in Google Classroom, but the icon is just called Classroom. The clock, contacts, Google Docs, which is just Docs, Google Drive, which is just Drive.
Actually, hold up. Send me a screenshot of your home screen so I can include it in the description.
All right.
Yeah, obviously you can do that in a minute, but
yeah, and then so I organize everything alphabetically, and there's really no reason as to why I do that. I just kind of do it just to do it. It's just something I thought of one time to make it unique, so that when people pick up my phone or see my phone, they're just like, "Oh, your apps are organized like that," and just get a conversation started, whatever it may be. I just have that just to have it really. As far as my lock screen on my iPhone, both my lock screen and my home screen are pitch black. It's just a picture of like a solid black. And the reason I have that is because with the black iPhone, it sort of makes it blend into the bezels, makes the screen look a little bit bigger. And also a long time ago, I learned that if you have your lock screen and home screen set to all black, your phone actually doesn't have to use as many pixels to generate an image, which can save you a little bit of battery, which, this was something that appealed to me, which I thought was cool. So I've done that. And it also just makes it look nice and simple and sleek. So that's just sort of how I have it set up and everything. As far as how frequently I use it, I'm admittedly I'm one of the people like almost basically anyone in this generation. I use my phone a lot, and I'm on it a lot. I'll just be scrolling through Twitter or Instagram a lot, and I actually don't. I text people a lot. You and I text back and forth about what we're planning to talk about on the podcast about the NBA draft just a couple of nights ago. I talked to a couple of my good friends, a lot of my cousins that I keep in contact with who live in either different countries or different states. One of the main apps that I use on is WhatsApp. It's very similar to iMessage. It's just you don't have to have an iPhone. It's just an app that you can download. You can talk to people all over the world, and all you need for it is an internet connection. You don't have to pay like a text messaging fee or something. So that makes it easy for all of our cousins to keep in contact with each other without having to pay any international fee or anything like that. Obviously, having an iPhone, I'll FaceTime a friend every now and then, but I always have my phone on me. It's almost just like a safety thing, really. Like it's just like if I'm in any situation where I'm out of the house somewhere, like I just feel like I absolutely have to have my phone, simply because like if something goes wrong, like if I have a flat tire and I don't know how to change it, or if I don't have a spare tire, I run out of gas randomly, or my car explodes or something. Now I just need to
sorry, that's not actually. Oh my gosh, car explodes.
If I just need to call someone, then obviously I have that. So what I actually did was, to further avoid having any situation like that, I actually purchased an Apple Watch, and I got the cellular feature on it so that you can actually make calls without having the actual device. So basically, you have your watch and you can still make calls and texts from your phone number without actually needing your phone with you. It basically acts as an independent extension of your phone. So I got that just to make, just in case I, drop my phone in a river somewhere or anything happened. That way I would still be able to make a call if I was in a bind or anything. So, I mean, I like having a smartphone. I would definitely at this point, now that it has all these features and um, as advanced as they're getting now, I would definitely never turn back unless obviously I was in a situation where I was completely unable to afford a smartphone. I'm, very fortunately, I'm not in a situation like that. I can comfortably have one without having to worry about the price too much. And, I enjoy it. And basically, I guess my favorite thing about having a smartphone to this day is basically what it was, which was my reasoning for wanting to get one, which is the access to the internet and just being able to, if you ever have a question that you need to look up, or if you ever want to know something, or if you ever need to look up the time of stores closing or a phone number for something, you can just swipe down from the top of your screen and type it in, and then you'll get the information in a couple seconds. And that's just something that's extremely convenient. And I think that it really, the people who began smartphones, like I don't remember if it was, I think it was Motorola made the first Android phone, and I think Apple obviously made the first iPhone. So I think they deserve a lot of credit for basically changing the way that people live their lives today, because now it's like everybody has a smartphone basically. And I remember my parents when smartphones came out, like both of them, they were like, "Oh, this is so gimmicky. Like everyone's been completely fine with these regular flip phones for so long. Why would you pay extra money for a technological device?" And now here we are, like 10, 11 years later, and both my parents have iPhones, and obviously they love having them as well for the same reasons that I do. So I think smartphones are a great tool that we have in the world today. I think they're definitely something that's cool, and I think that it's something that's probably not going to go away. And I look forward to seeing how they advance in the future, and hopefully one day I can have the courage to finally switch back to Android and go back home.
Yeah. For me, the argument between Android and Apple has always come down to how much control do you want? Do you want to be the kind of person that can tinker with any of the settings and customize your device however you want it? If you do, go Android. If you don't want to have to worry about that, then go for iPhone. And I really think that it just comes down to that for almost everybody. If you're using an Android, it's because you want to customize something. And if you don't want to worry about it, like most people don't, then you just go for an iPhone. I really think it just comes down to that. The phones are so similar, and sure, like Android has like I don't know the screen that the little edge thing that runs off the side of the screen that looks pretty cool, or oh maybe it has a better camera, but nobody's buying it because of that. Like I mean, nobody's coming out and being like, "Ooh, let me check the decimal points on those specifications. I have to know which phone I'm getting." Most people they're buying it just because of like the way that it goes and like the I mean yeah, just the control that it gives over them. And for me, I I mean I've always used an iPhone just well not always. I actually had a flip phone for like I don't know like 6 months and then I ran it in the wash and that was before everyone would put it in a rice bowl, so that was gone. But yeah,
Yeah,
I ran with an iPhone. I believe I don't even know what it was. I think it was an iPhone 1 for like 2 years or something, and that was fun. But yeah, like I ran with that for the longest time, and I felt fine with it. I didn't really use my smartphone for anything other than just calling somebody or texting my parents if I had to. 'Cause, honestly, there was a weird thing in my house where I just didn't realize the internet existed until I was like 13 years old. I don't really know how this happened, but like that was just a thing. That, like I didn't know it existed, and that was weird. I don't know what was up with that. So obviously I didn't get anything out of that aspect of the smartphone. But yeah, no, certainly once I found out about that, yeah, that was definitely something I was using the iPhone for more. But yeah, after that, I upgraded to the iPhone 5C that I know you've seen me have.
which you broke in our Spanish
I
class.
did, yes. That was oh,
I remember that
that's
day.
still the only time I've ever broken a phone. Just dropped it in Spanish class one time, and it was a really stupid drop too. I just like dropped it between my legs somehow, and yeah, I don't even know how it broke. But no, from there I just have run with a iPhone 5S or 6. I always forget which one it is, and it's worked fantastic for me. I've had this phone for 3 years now, and it still doesn't have any cracks on it. And the biggest reason I think that's the case is, well, first of all, I don't use my phone when I'm walking around or like use it in like precarious situations, like I don't know, standing over jagged edges or whatever. Like most of the time, I'm sitting down when I'm using my phone, and if I drop it, okay, like what's it really going to land on? But the case that I use for my phone, I think is the best combination of not customization, it has nothing to do with that, of comfortability and security. So the case that I use a iPhone skin. And the biggest thing with the skin is it has a lot of friction on it. And this goes along with what a lot of people do with their phone is they have like the stupid backing on their phone that like has a little eh, I don't really know what it's called. It's like that,
The circular thing.
yeah, big circular
Yeah,
thing.
it's called a pop something. I don't know. I know exactly what it is though. It's like the thing that you use to like you put your fingers in between the circle and it
Yeah,
pops. It's dumb.
yeah.
I don't.
It looks like the thing that I have on my navigation tool in my car that I used, like the suction cup that I used to hang it up
Yeah,
on the windshield.
yeah, exactly.
Oh, it's
Yeah,
terrible. But I don't even know how it's comfortable in your pocket. But no, like it works great. The skin works great for me. It has great friction. Like I can hold my phone at like a, I'm holding it right now at like a what is that, like a 80-degree angle almost, and it's still stuck to my hand. And I mean, it works. It works awesome for me. It feels great. I don't even notice a difference. It just sticks to my hand. Yeah, it just feels good. And it also has a tiniest lip to it on the sides. So if it lands like face first, like it just did right there, nothing's going to happen to it because it doesn't actually strike the screen of the phone. It strikes the lip. And
yeah.
like there's no possible way it can actually hit the phone unless it's landing on like a stalagmite or something. Just hits it on that. But I mean, how often are you in a cave anyways? But yeah, like it's just a very safe solution, and I've been very happy with it. I don't really need a performance upgrade because this is a huge thing that I advocate to everyone that uses an iPhone. And as you can see, I'm very opinionated with my thoughts, but I recommend very highly that you have to know the 80-20 rule with the iPhone. So now you're wondering, Ryan, what's the 80-20 rule? Well, let me tell you. So this has to do with your battery life. So tell me what your system is for battery life.
For me,
Yeah.
um, for well, it depends because I know that if you had asked me a couple years ago, I definitely would have been able to tell you the specifications. But I generally look for a phone that has at least 2,500 milliamp hours on its battery life,
Okay.
as far as specifications go. But I mean, for me, like if the phone can't, if it can't last me from basically from like like I guess I'll give you an example from when we were in the school year. So I would wake up for school at 6:30 to basically, and I would get ready in 20 minutes and then leave and then get to school just before cap morning or whatever, and then so I would basically take my phone off the charger around 6:30, but like between 6:30 a.m. and 6:45 a.m. And then if I can't, I would preferably like to be able to use my phone casually, not extremely heavy usage, not using it all day, not playing on it all day, not that stuff. Just having it in my pocket, taking it out when I need to use it, having to make a call, a text message if I need to, and then comfortably be able to put it back on the charger around 8 or 9 p.m. So I guess what that makes it about 12 to 14 to 16 hours of usage. Yeah, 14 to 16 hours of light usage is generally where I like to go.
Okay.
And if my phone can't do that and it's something that like dies in like 12, 13 hours, then that's going to be a problem.
Okay. So, but you charge your phone by leaving it on the charger overnight?
Yes.
Okay. So that for me, that's the biggest no-no that you can do with charging your phone. And I'll tell you why. So, you know how Apple says that you can leave your phone on the charger for however long you want, and it'll just shut off the flow of electricity to the battery or whatever?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it doesn't.
Yeah, no.
And
I know exactly what you're talking about and how like there's all this stuff about how you're actually not really supposed to leave your phone on the battery overnight. But I mean, I have T-Mobile in the plan that I have. It allows me to get a new iPhone every year.
yeah,
So
and
um,
you're safe with that, yeah.
fortunately, it sounds a little lavish and
No,
sort of rich boy esque and stuff. But if I don't really worry about it too much, just because I always have that insurance of knowing that I'll be able to. If worse comes to worse, I'll be able to get another phone. But
yeah,
obviously, like if you're going to use it for an extended period of time, you definitely should not keep it. At least not every night. Definitely, it's much better to charge it during the day when you need to.
yeah.
But go ahead. Dude.
But how long? So you've had the iPhone 10 for what, 9 months? Do you have the battery health thing on your phone?
Let me see. Let me actually search battery.
Yeah,
Did you check it exactly?
yeah. Just go to your settings and then go to battery,
Okay, settings, battery.
and then go to battery health beta.
Battery health beta. Okay.
Okay.
And what do I read you? The maximum capacity number?
Yes.
93.
Okay. Do you want to know what my maximum capacity is?
What?
93.
Oh, okay.
So the significance there, obviously, being I've had my phone 4 times longer, but the 80-20 rule that I've been teasing is basically never let your phone over 80% battery and never let it below 20% battery. And if you do those two things, then you're going to preserve your lithium ion battery so well. Because the biggest problem with the lithium ion battery is, and this is a principle of the battery, and unfortunately, if you ask any scientist, the big thing that desperately needs to develop in technology is batteries, and it just has not in like the past 100 years, really. But if basically the problem with overcharging a lithium-ion battery is it loses capacitance over time, and the longer it's holding a charge that it can't contain, basically, it just loses capacitance, and I mean that's just what happens. So it loses overall capacity, and if it loses too much, then it just loses overall capacitance. So that's the big problem. And when Apple says that, oh, you can just leave your phone on the charger overnight, well, you might as well be stabbing a hole in your battery at that point, because it's just, I mean, obviously it doesn't matter for you, but like for someone that's planning on using their phone for like years on years, it's a huge problem where like you're just wrecking your battery life. And my big thing for how I charge my phone, and obviously this doesn't work for everyone, but just whenever I have like a, so let's say, like, so it just for me, I obviously I'm using the iPhone 6 or 5S, whatever it is. I think it's the 6. I always say the 5S though. But for me, at least, it takes me like 30 minutes of it, just about 30 minutes, 40 minutes to charge my phone from like 20% to 80% or whatever, from like 40 to 80 is usually what I do because I rarely get down to 20% anyways. So it just whenever I have like a spare half an hour or something and I'm at home, which is always going to happen, unless you're a crazy person, like you're out until like 2 in the morning or something, you just don't come home at night. Just stay up for like 30 minutes when you're at home and charge your phone and then go to sleep. And that's what I try and tell people, and they're like, screw that, I'll just keep doing what I'm doing because it works. And I mean, obviously, it's a lot easier to just plug your phone at night and go to sleep. But if you want to have your battery last for any extended period of time, it makes a humongous difference. I read a study one time. I'm going to try and find that study, not now because I'm not going to find it now. I tried to find it one time earlier and couldn't find it. But it was a study on the modeling the life, basically the overall capacitance of batteries, as just based on the different ways that you charge your phone. And there was a giant drop off if you don't follow the 80-20 rule. And unfortunately, that's not mine. I can't have it be the Ryan Moret 80-20 rule, but it helps a ton if you do that. And it's really not as hard as it sounds to just find a half an hour and charge it. And like you can still use it if you want. You just go sit down somewhere and charge it, or even get like an external battery and just walk around with it and have the external battery in your pocket. But yeah, that's the whole spiel on the 80-20 rule. But yeah, for me, I also like to just have it last the entire time when I'm outside of the house. Yeah, I'm pretty much the same way as you. Well, no, I shouldn't say that. You probably use it much more than me in school, but yeah, for me, like the only time I'm using my phone is either at lunch or, and this also goes for the workplace. So I can't just act like, oh, this is some school kid talking about his way. Now do this. I've done this every time at my internship as well. It's just I use it when I'm at lunch, and then I use it when I'm heading home for listening to podcasts. And I suppose if I had like a free half an hour or something, just nothing's going on in class, yeah, I would use it then. But I don't need my phone to last that long when I'm outside of the house. Only like an hour of use at that, and it's not heavy use case or anything. I'm not watching like some movie or something on my phone. I just needed to be able to send text messages at that point, surf the internet, and that's pretty much it. And in that sense, I don't really understand how people have so many problems with their battery life. It's like how much are you really using your phone when you're outside of the house? And like I get it if you're walking around the city or something, you need directions and like you don't want to get lost, so you constantly have Google Maps running. But that just sounds ridiculous. And even so, at that point, just keep an external battery in like a backpack or something, and just have it plugged into the phone, and just do that. Like for here, let me grab the external battery that I have just so I can give the company a shout out. So, okay, it's right here. Yeah, Anker. they make an awesome external battery that has like 50 hours of battery life. I'll look up online what the milliamp specification is, but I mean it's more than enough to last like a couple iPad charges. So yeah, I don't know what people are talking about. I feel like it's just complaining about nothing.
And another suggestion while Ryan looks that up is if you like for me, I had a 30-minute drive to school back and forth every day, and
Okay, here.
you,
So I just found the specification. It's 27,000 milliamps.
oh wow, that's huge. That's actually huge.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
not even that big. It's like as big as my hand.
Oh yeah, yeah. I've seen a couple of those. There are a couple of different companies that make them. I used one from a company called Tilt, TYLT.
Okay.
Smaller one. It was 10,400 milliamp hours, but still, it
Yeah,
could definitely get me
and
through.
only $70. I mean, it's not crazy.
Yeah. And like I was saying, if you have a, if, like, so I drove 30 minutes back and forth to school every day. So if I had ever forgotten to charge my phone the night before, I could literally just charge it on the 30-minute ride to school, and I'd
Yeah.
be fine for the remainder of the day. So if you just get a car charger, and that can also solve a lot of issues depending on how much you drive.
Oh yeah. But yeah, that pretty much summarizes that argument. Then I guess I didn't touch at all on my app layout on my phone. So for me, I was horrible about this probably uh, aside from like 2 months ago or so when I just completely changed my strategy around this. So before I used to just arrange my apps however I wanted to. I was just like I don't really care. I always kept it to one screen, but I just had a ton of folders everywhere. But after listening to a couple of Hello Internet episodes, a podcast I really enjoy by CGP Grey, where they just talked about app layout for like the third time or whatever, I was like, okay, I gotta get this under control. So the big philosophy I've taken into how I lay out the apps on my phone now is one that I basically stole from them to keep the bottom row of my phone completely open because I think it's easier to go up on my phone than it is to go down. And I know that doesn't exactly work for you because you're working on a much bigger phone, but for me, like, it's a perfect size for my hand. Like I have relatively large hands, if not large hands, and fairly flexible fingers where like I'm fine reaching across my phone to get to the very top, and if not, I can shift it up my hand up a bit on the phone, so I have that friction to work with, so I can easily get to the top. But if I'm going to the bottom, I have to like do a weird maneuver or like get my palm where like the speaker is to get it. Like it's not comfortable to get to the bottom row of your phone. So I feel like you should leave that open. And I just left the row above that open as well because I realized I didn't actually need it to be open aside. Yeah, I didn't need anything there really. And then one of the other things I advocate is to have free apps in your dock and not four. And to do that because of symmetry and to counteract the stuff above the apps above, which are arranged in rows of four, obviously, and to also go along with the button at the bottom of your phone that's one. So you have four, then three, then one, which works better than four, then two. Then it's just the home button at the bottom of your phone is it's like a jarring thing. It's like whoa, we just went from four to one. That happened all of a sudden. But yeah, that's my big thoughts on that. And then also to have as much as you can to have your top row be folders and then the next two or three rows to be apps, and then just keep it at that, and just have one of the things that I've picked up on in my app layout is I like to have I like to have symmetry in how I do it. So if you can see the picture on your phone now, I don't. Did you ever get the screenshot of my apps?
Yeah, I did.
Okay, cool. So you can see that in the top left and the top right corner, the two hardest ones to get to, with how my phone is laid out, I have the well, one of them's obviously titled boring stuff, but yeah, the boring stuff, like the stuff that I'm not going to be going to much, but like just doesn't have much value to me. And like those are two rows of not two rows, two free by free squares of apps that like are basically settings and like stuff that I have to have on my phone. But like I'm much less likely to use it, and I mean it just creates a good idea for like okay, in the corners I have this, and I know I can always go to the corners for that. Then in between that, I just have a couple games that I'm still trying to get rid of on my phone. Mostly, I just have them on there still because I have high scores on them, and I don't want to lose those high scores by deleting the apps and then re-downloading them and not being there. Really, I just need to take a bunch of screenshots of them, copy them onto a Word document, and delete the apps. But I just haven't gotten around to that yet. That'll probably change soon enough. Then in the row below that, I have like a kind of a sports row, and then also a game that I play very frequently, And then I actually have Workflows, which is a really cool app. If you haven't played around with Workflows, essentially what it lets you do is just apply very simple scripts that'll just tell your phone essentially to call up a bunch of different apps at once. So like one of the scripts I have is called Directions Home, that when I tap on the app, it queues up Google Maps and it gives me driving directions from wherever I am currently to my house. So and it just does that automatically. So I think that's really cool, and that's really the only one I've played around with because I haven't had the app for that long. But yeah, Workflows. And then the row below that, I just have a row of social stuff, and then another game on the right side. And yeah, and I in the bottom free, not the bottom free, in the dock. And this is really important. You have to put the free apps that you use the most, and if not the apps that you use the most, the ones that have some connection. So, like for me, the free apps I have down at the very bottom are the ones that I am in the top four in usage on my phone. And if not top four in usage, then the top four in the amount of times I tap on it. Because, like, I don't know, maybe I'll be on CBS Sports for an hour while I'll be on reminders for like a minute or so. But I'm going to do that minute interaction far more often than the CBS Sports. But the free apps that I have in the very bottom are Safari, so obviously my web-based interactions, reminders, which I essentially use as a note-taking device, and I also use for food tracking, and then a baseball app because I just happen to like baseball and I'm always paying attention to baseball, so that was always on there. And I really like the fact that the reminders is in the middle of the dock because I feel like that gives it the most prominence. But also, the left side of your phone should be, well, at least if you're a right-handed phone user. I haven't met anyone that's cross-dominant in that they are right-handed but use their phone in their left hand. But yeah, you also want to prioritize the left side of your phone because that's going to be easier to get to than the right side, where you have to like scrunch up your thumb a little bit or push your phone out to get to it easily. So that's essentially the philosophy for my phone there. And my background is very similar to you. I have a nice black background. If you turn up the brightness on your phone, oh, that's another thing I didn't mention. I run with my phone on the lowest brightness possible because it's not actually that low. You can still see everything fine. It conserves battery great. Also do low power mode. I don't know why most people don't do that, but just constant low power mode gives you so much more battery. But as I was saying, if you turn up the brightness on your phone, you can see it's not actually a black background. It's actually a really nice background, but you just can't tell it looks really nice unless you want it to look nice. So it's, if not a double-edged sword there, it has like a little hidden surprise. So I really like that. And then obviously for my lock screen, I have the quintessential anteater in a jean jacket that I've run with for so long. I couldn't spare that. So yeah, that's something I do. Oh, and also I have a weather app in my widgets, just so whenever I need to know the weather, I can just, scoot over to the left and see that. But yeah, the biggest things here, just for app design: symmetry, logical placement, free in the dock, and one screen. So yeah, okay. Okay, so I already got the answer on if you always buy the new phone. Yes, how you arrange an app. Okay, this one's interesting. So, how would you raise a kid today with smartphones obviously being present?
Well, this is something I think about this quite a lot actually.
Good.
So, um, so when I was, obviously I'm a little biased, but I think my parents did a decent job raising me, and my brother for that matter. So basically, so my brother and I were only separated by 19 months, and about 20 months actually. But anyways, so
That's actually the same as my brother and me.
yeah, he was March '99. I was October 2000. So yeah, about 20 months, and we we were both like, because we were so close in age, we sort of got into like wanting the same things at basically the same time and stuff. So it sort of made it easy for our parents to kind of like gauge our interests and like get us things because like it was. And my dad has always been really big about like being fair and like always getting us both the same things at the same time. Like we never really had that disparity where it's like, oh, older brother gets this, little brother doesn't get this, and all this. Like basically, apart from when we got our cars, like everything has basically been the same. So when we were about when we were he was 10 and I was 9, and that's when we got our first like cell phones. And we got the little the dinky little slide phones, because like just you're at that age where like if you maybe you start hanging out with friends a little bit more, you might just stay after school for like for whatever. You're just at that age where it's just more necessary for you to actually you're not as close to your parents and at their hip as you were the year before. So that's kind of where you started to get them and stuff. And then obviously my brother and I were both been really into electronics and stuff, so we always wanted to we wanted smartphones right from the jump, obviously. But our parents were like, they were like, no, like you should wait a couple more years. You don't have any use for it right now. So about the time when we started middle school, my brother was in 7th grade and I was in 6th grade, and that is when we got our first smartphones. And obviously they're not as prominent. Like I feel like with how rapidly everything is advancing in terms of technology and the internet and all that stuff, it sort of changes year by year. So I feel like even though the start of middle school for us was only in 2011, which was only 7 years ago, it's like it's kind of has changed a lot. And I guess I'll kind of gauge when I have my own children, I guess I'll gauge it by how the climate is for all that stuff then. But as far as what I'm thinking right now, what I'm probably thinking is probably to get them a smartphone for their first smartphone around the time that they become teenagers, 13, somewhere between the ages of like 12 and 14, something like that. Because I just feel like at that age, that's sort of where you're more. I feel like that's kind of where you establish a good level of independence to where you might actually need to, like, I don't know, like your homework gets a little bit harder. You're finally in middle school. Things get a little bit more challenging. You might actually have a need to look something up. You might actually have a need to surf the internet for something. Whereas I think when you're like in elementary school and you're like a 4th grader or a 5th grader, like, I mean, what use do you really have for needing to search the internet? But I just think middle school, like the school gets, depending on where you go, obviously, like things get a little bit bigger. You're exposed to a lot more people. I just feel like as you get older, all your needs increase, and I just feel like that's sort of a fine age. And just because I feel like it really, I mean, it served me and my brother fine. It served us perfectly, basically, for the age at which we got them, and like we never really, it never became something that we needed confiscated or anything that we couldn't control. So assuming that I'm able to one day raise nice good kids, then I don't think it'll be an issue getting them around the time that 12, 13, 14, something like that. They can have it, and then they can just obviously use it responsibly, not do anything stupid with it. And then if they are to, then obviously I would take it away for a little while. But the main thing that I would urge them to do with their smartphone is just don't buy into all this stuff that, like, I mean, there are some kids these days, or I guess I shouldn't say some kids these days, since you and I are still kids as well.
Yeah.
But kids who are a little bit younger than us, like 13-year-olds, 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds, who are just so obsessed with like Instagram and Snapchat and Twitter and stuff. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with having those things, because obviously they're enjoyable and you get to see some things and it's fun. It's just a good way to keep in tune with all your friends and see what's going on, especially Twitter. Twitter is something like that actually keeps people informed about certain issues, and the trends on there often have to do with something relevant. Like yesterday, I found out that in Alexandria they're renaming Jefferson Davis Highway to Richmond Highway in Alexandria only.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah, so I found that out yesterday for Twitter, so it can be a cool source of information, just randomly, which is nice. But I mean, the main thing that I would urge them to do with their smartphone is just, number one, use it responsibly. Don't do anything stupid with it, and don't live your life on social media. Don't stay on social media all the time. And just because you can do a lot of stuff on your phone, just don't feel like your phone is everything, because obviously there's more to life than your phone. There's still such a thing as actually using your laptop to surf the web and writing, like that stuff. And there's actually such a thing as still going outside and looking at stuff instead of looking at pictures of stuff. And there's such a thing as actually going outside and playing sports instead of just watching clips of sports on your phone. And there's all sorts of stuff. So my main thing would sort of just be to stay off social media. Obviously, you can use it, have a good time with it, be responsible with it. But don't go overboard with it. Don't get obsessed with it, because social media is really, I mean, it's really just kind of like, I mean, I don't want to say that it's pointless, but like, I mean, really, I don't see much of a point of having a bunch of followers on there or any of that stuff. Like, I don't feel like it's all that necessary. So, obviously, but again, like, I would let them have their freedom and stuff. Like, just use it responsibly. Don't do anything dumb. and realize that just because you have a phone doesn't mean that you're obligated to use it all the time. Like, use it lightly, take care of your battery life, 80-20 rule,
Hmm.
and, be good about it. And I guess just don't use it all the time. Don't get addicted to it, because obviously there's such a thing as phone addiction, as we learned this year with in our college comp class. But
Yes.
yeah, I don't really think it'll be too much of an issue. But like I said earlier, the climate could change by then. There could be some crazy new features where you can do even more crazy stuff in the future. So I guess I'll see then. But as of right now, I wouldn't really think that it's all too much of a problem.
Yeah, I have a very similar approach to you. I think I would give it to them about, 12, 13. And biggest thing is I want them to have a childhood that's not designed around the smartphone. I want them to use the smartphone with perspective, not use the smartphone as a necessity. And well, that was well, I really botched that one. I had an awesome opportunity there. Oh well. So yeah, just understand that the smartphone is a tool, but like it's not something that you have to have and like you can't do anything without. And like have a childhood where like you're developing the most outside, or like in your you're just spending time with people and not developing in a way where you're learning your social interactions through texting people, or which is fine. Like texting's good, but yeah, like it's just it becomes a problem. And I just, yeah, I think it's really important to not have that happen. So yeah, that's a big thing for me. But
I definitely don't want them to be consumed, because like exactly what you said. Like, my childhood was great because like, I played outside with my friends. I went outside. We played two-hand touch football. I played video games with my cousins and my brother. And I lived in Michigan. We had snow outside. We could do a lot of stuff. We went sledding and stuff. And like, I don't associate my phone with any of those. Whereas if you ask me about more recent memories that probably the past couple of years, like I'll remember like if I was in a situation, maybe I went on my phone, like if I had a question or something, or I called someone with my smartphone, or I looked something up, or I texted someone, or I was FaceTiming someone. Like, I have more memories of that stuff now, and I wouldn't want my childhood to be ridden with just I spent my childhood on my phone. So yeah, definitely, I would, after they've already secured a nice, fun childhood that they had fun with and actually did stuff with and developed real interest with. After they've done that successfully, and after I feel like they've actually lived their childhood, their young childhood, then I wouldn't have a problem with getting them one after that.
yeah, no, exactly. And I'm definitely going to touch on next time what you think about the whole issue around giving them access to the internet, because I think that's a huge issue as well. But you know what? I think that's a good stopping point. We're at like 3 hours 15. I think we covered a ton. I think we had some amazing dialogue on free will and just a ton of different discussions. And I certainly didn't expect to be 2.5 hours in and not have had to pull out anything on my side. That's it really speaks highly to the flow of discussion. And you know what? If you guys liked the flow of discussion, if you like the topics we talked about, hey, if you like me, well, then you know what to do. Give us a rating on your podcasting app. Head over to YouTube, Topical, the Rationalizing the Monkey Brain. Give us a subscribe. You don't have to give us a like. I don't really care, but a quick refresh before you head off the page would be nice. Maybe give those bots a little trouble. Why not? And you know what? I think we're gonna do this again. So I had a lot of fun. I'll see you. Goodbye.